Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and time for the April 19th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners for Indian River County. Jeffrey Smith will give the invocation today, and that will be followed by the pledge by Alan Polakwich. Please stand.
Bow our heads and let us pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time, Lord, that we can come and to do thy business. Lord, be with these commissioners as they make tough decisions. Lord, I know that there's unrest in the world and economic hard times, Lord, but help us to rely on you. In your word, you say that if people that are called by your name will humble themselves and pray and seek your face and turn from their wicked ways, then you will hear from heaven and heal our land, Lord. And we just ask for that today, Lord. Be with us as we go through this day. These things we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll ask now if there are any additions or deletions to the agenda or any emergency items.
Mr. Chairman, I guess we did have a substitute under 8C in consent, so just acknowledge that for the record.
We'll do that. Any other changes, additions, or deletions?
Move to approve the agenda as amended.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner O'Brien, a second from Commissioner Davis. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Next, we have a proclamation, and this is a presentation of a proclamation designating April 18th to the 24th, 2011 as National Cleaning for a Reason Week. Commissioner O'Brien will present to Tom Heveron, the CEO of Beachland Cleaning. Mr. Heveron?
There he is. Good morning. This is, I think one of these things where people just don't realize how important the service you all provide for someone who's undergoing treatment for cancer and what it means to have somebody be able to come in and clean their house for them. And I just know with my wife, it's one of the big things that really gets her irked. And for you all to come in and do that for the people that are ill, I think is a wonderful thing. So it's with great pleasure that I present this proclamation, which is designating April 18th through April 24th, 2011 as National Cleaning for a Reason Week. Whereas Beachland Cleaning Service is currently a participating partner in the Cleaning for a Reason Foundation in Indian River County, and whereas the Cleaning for a Reason Foundation is a nonprofit organization that offers free professional house cleaning services to improve the lives of women undergoing treatment for cancer. Since its inception in 2007, its maid service partners have donated over $1,500,000 worth of free cleaning to more than 4,700 women nationwide. And whereas Beachland Cleaning Service has donated $80,000 in services to 46 women along the Treasure Coast of Florida who are undergoing treatment for cancer, thereby allowing them to focus on their health. And whereas the Cleaning for a Reason Foundation continues to grow as it improves the lives of women stricken with this cruel disease. The foundation is truly deserving of this recognition for its worth efforts on behalf of those it serves. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that April 18th through April 24th, 2011 be recognized as the National Cleaning for a Reason Week, and hereby commend the Cleaning for a Reason Foundation and Beachland Cleaning Service for its dedication to helping women during a traumatic time in their lives. Adopted this 19th day of April, 2011, and signed by all 5 county commissioners. Mr. Heveron, would you like to say a few words for us, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I can't thank the board enough for doing this. We are a proud partner of yours as well to provide services, and we take very seriously our efforts is not only for our customers, but for our community that we serve. Indian River County is where we perform these services. Clean for a Reason between 2006 and 2009 provided 2,500 women $638,000 worth of services. Last year alone, there was 2,557 women provided services at over $650,000 worth, and there were 530 new partners added, bringing the total at the end of the year to 880 partners, more than doubling almost everything combined for the previous years. Proclamations like these are a cornerstone to us recruiting more partners and getting more help, because there's still 2,000 calls a week for help. We're doing the best we can, and we're making huge strides in making efforts to help people. Beachland Cleaning Service, we have been honored with the National Partner of the Year in 2009 for our contributions. But not only that, is we have also designed and promote a program for commercial cleaning companies to become involved, who don't particularly clean homes but become involved. We have cleaned 8 patients. We've helped patients get help in Florida, New York, Pennsylvania. We've recruited partners in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Oklahoma. And we were also contributed and designed the grand prize for the awards banquet held in Dallas. We've done that in the last 6 months. I also was able to solicit the first celebrity endorsement for the foundation that we never had. So I was able to get to a world-renowned rock star from the 70s, Roger Hodgson, who was a co-founder of the group Supertramp, and send a message to the partners, as well as allowing us to use his song, Give a Little Bit, in recruiting efforts for this year.
Great.
So it's something we're proud of, too. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you for honoring C4R.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr.
Pardon? I just wanted to say that, you know, I like this, I love this, because it's not a government grant. It's people participating and doing things on their own for the good of the community and to help their fellow human beings, and these are becoming rarer and rarer today, and I think you're to be commended for the fact that this is a voluntary organization that does a lot of good in the community.
Thank you very much. It's primarily funded by its partners as well. So
I like this probably because it caught me so off guard the first time this came before us. We do a lot of proclamating up here, and whenever I saw this cleaning for a reason, don't take it wrong, but I said, you've got to be kidding me. And then I started reading it, and when I did, it got me a little teary-eyed to understand exactly, you know, what the headline. I don't know, it does do justice now that I know what the proclamation is about and what it was about then, but it just totally caught me off guard, and I couldn't think of a better thing, because just like Peter said, my wife, I mean, if I try again, she's got to clean it up, or I've got to clean it up, and typically there's, you know, good discussion about that, but if she was ever ill or something along those lines and we were in this situation, what a phenomenal service, and anything that we can do to help further get the message out and help promote your cause, let us know.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Congratulations. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
You want to get a picture, Carl?
How about the rest of the team? Notice that.
Do you have it?
Cancer awareness. Put it in. Well.
Gave it to us to use, so it's great.
And it came with
Great. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have presentation of a proclamation designating May 2011 as Cigarette Litter Prevention Month in Indian River County. Commissioner Davis is going to present this to Vicki Wild of Keep Indian River Beautiful. Good morning.
Good morning, Vicki. Welcome. This is a proclamation designating May 2011 as Cigarette Litter Prevention Month in Indian River County. Whereas the control of litter and litter prevention is vitally important to the quality of life of Indian River County. And whereas the Indian River County has an interest in encouraging every citizen and business and its employees to protect and preserve the beauty and cleanliness of the community. And whereas Keep Indian River Beautiful, a local affiliate of Keep America Beautiful Incorporated, is encouraging individual responsibility, community partnership, and advocating volunteerism in addressing an emerging cigarette litter problem. And whereas Keep Indian River Beautiful is launching a cigarette litter prevention program to reduce cigarette litter in Indian River County. And whereas the Indian River County Board of County Commissioners and the Board of Directors of Keep Indian River Beautiful, in cooperation with local businesses, community, and civic leaders, agree that cigarette litter has become a community-wide problem and have a strong interest in reducing it and eventually eliminating it. And whereas all citizens are invited to support the cigarette litter prevention program in Indian River County, which is launched May 2nd, 2011. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the Board designates May 2011 as Cigarette Litter Prevention Month in Indian River County, signed by all 5 county commissioners.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Say a few words.
Hello. As you know, I've been in CURB about 4 months now, and I'm proud to say that CURB's been doing very well. We've actually done and participated in over 60 events since I've been there. We've been doing the Adopt a Road program, Clean Beach programs, lagoon cleanups, and we've been collecting a lot of cigarette butts. Back in 2008, we started the cigarette litter prevention program, and we collected over 1,300 butts back then, and then in 2010, it was down to 637. Now we're implementing it. We're going to start at the new, at the Vero Beach Marina over there, and we're going to start a program there. And we just were granted a grant for cigarette litter prevention. Great. So they're going to be giving us the pocket ashtrays and the receptacles and stuff. So we're going to be implementing the program at another spot as well.
All right.
So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for your hard work. Mickey, you can come down all the way. Got to run the garment, Mickey. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Next, we have a presentation of a proclamation recognizing National Correctional Officers Week. This will be read by Commissioner Fletcher and presented to Sheriff Lohr, Captain Selby Strickland, and Corrections Deputies Jeff Ripple and Mark Douglas. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to see a large amount of green. We have other members in the audience as well. I see a few lieutenants there as well, Sheriff. Yeah, brought the big guns in. Thank you. Well, today I have the honorable privilege of presenting this proclamation to a huge amount of collective years here represented. I believe, Captain Strickland, you have what collectively in man-hours about 100 years of service. Not bad for a 40-year-old man. And you gentlemen as well, thank you for serving. Proclamation reads as follows, which recognizes National Correctional Officers Week. Whereas National Correctional Officers Week has been declared as May 22 through 6, 2011, and whereas Indian River County has 130 full-time correctional officers as well as 49 dedicated support staff to the Corrections Division on its table of organization. And whereas Indian River County's dedicated staff of correctional officers serve in an ever-changing profession and work in the correctional environment as an officer's first, and a nurse, superintendent, case manager, food service worker, etc. Second, responsible for the care, custody, and welfare of inmates within Indian River County. And whereas in today's profession, correctional officers are well trained and have extensive background in investigations to ensure that they are so sound moral character. And whereas a correctional officer's work is an untiring job, one with huge responsibilities to maintain public safety as well as help inmates develop the skills necessary to become productive members of society. These dedicated men and women daily put their lives on the line and perform very difficult tasks that can be dangerous as well as frustrating. And whereas correctional officers deserve our show of support and increase in public awareness about their important role in the communities, and the citizenry should also recognize this week to their hard work and dedication and efforts to protect the public's safety. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the Indian River County recognizes and honors May 2nd through May 6th, 2011 as National Correctional Officers Week, duly adopted this 19th day of April 2011, signed by all 5 county commissioners.
Thank you,
Sheriff.
Joe. Thank you very much, and it's an honor and a privilege to be in front of you today to recognize this. As you know, the first week of May is always Correctional Officer Week, and we're very, very proud of that. Proud of the family members that have come out to support the correctional deputies that are here today. You know, sometimes we overlook, and I know recently you were given an opportunity to tour our facility. Sometimes we overlook that we're the 3rd largest health provider in the county, next to our 2 hospitals. We have a daily average inmate of over 500 inmates, and throughout the year we see over 13,000 inmates. They do a remarkable job day in and day out. It essentially is its own city. And today we brought 2 outstanding deputies to recognize them for a recent event that they were involved in. Deputy Jeff Ripple and Deputy Mark Douglas, whose his parents are here with us today. Just a few weeks ago, we had a minimum security inmate that had no signs or symptoms of suicidal tendencies decide one afternoon that in fact he was going to attempt to commit suicide. In doing so, took a bed sheet, tied it around one of the upper story levels of the banister, if you will, tied it around his neck, and simply jumped. In quick order, Deputy Ripple was there. He happened to be in the area doing some maintenance and was able to rush in along with Deputy Douglas, along with a few other inmates that assisted, and in short order, in a matter of seconds, saved this inmate's lives. Unfortunately, on the way down, he did strike Deputy Douglas in the head, but I think he's okay. It's a pending workers' comp claim, so we'll be all right with that. But in light of that, these men are truly heroes. What that could have turned into, and down the line as far as litigation goes, could have turned into some serious things. So we honor these 2 gentlemen today for the work that they've done day in and day out. And thank you for the proclamation.
Good job. Thank you. Got a nice collection of these now. Thank you. Sheriff, thank you. Thank you, sir. Great service. Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have the presentation of a proclamation designating the week of May 2nd through May 6th, 2011 as Law Week. This will be presented by Commissioner Wheeler to Attorney Jason Odom of Gould, Pusey & Fennell. Good morning.
Good morning. This designates the week of May 2nd through May 6th, 2011 as Law Week, whereas this country was founded on the principles that voluntary adherence to the rule of law expands rather than limits the opportunities for freedom. And whereas a viable democracy requires understanding of the nature and basis of our freedoms and recognition of the individual responsibilities which those freedoms impose. Whereas the theme of Law Week 2011 is entitled The Legacy of John Adams from Boston to Guantanamo, encourages us to examine the rule of law, our role in its sustainability, and the role of protecting our communities, our democracy, opportunity, equality, equity, and also, and all of that for the most, precious to us, those most precious to us, excuse me. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County that the week of May 2nd through May 6th as Law Week 2011 During Law Week, the Indian River County Bar Association will be hosting the following events. Ask a Lawyer Day. This event will be held May 5th from 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in the Indian River County Courthouse Law Library. And Law Week television show, this event is scheduled for May 4th from 7 to 9 p.m. Members of the community at large are encouraged to call in and ask our panel of lawyers any legal questions they may have. And lawyers and judges in school week. During this week, dozens of members of the Bar Association will volunteer their time to mentor local middle and high school students. Adopted this 19th day of April 2011, signed by all 5 Board County Commissioners. And the only question I'd have is what channel you're going to be on, or channels you're going to be on for the television?
Sure. The Law Week TV show will be on Channel 28, the education channel.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. On behalf of the Indian River County Bar Association, and in particular the Young Lawyers Division, we thank the county for recognizing Law Week. It's very important to us. It's largely put on by the Young Lawyers Division, but just about nearly all of the 100-plus attorneys in Indian River County and judges participate in Law Week. And as the Commissioner said, during the entire week, our lawyers and judges will be in most classrooms in Indian River County teaching our students on civics and their responsibilities as citizens of this great country. On the 4th will be the TV show, so Channel 28 between 7 and 9. Anybody from the public can call in with questions on criminal law, family custody disputes, estate planning and probate, foreclosure, landlord-tenant, anything you can think of to be answered by a panel of lawyers. Also on May 5th, and very important, I hope people will come out, if anybody from the public does have questions or concerns or problems involving foreclosures, which is a very big issue as you all know, landlord-tenant, eviction, custody disputes, come down. There'll be plenty of lawyers there. You can meet privately with them and have all of your questions answered. And if they can't answer them, they will direct you to get the help that you need. So it's a great program. Nearly all of our lawyers in the county participate. It's very important to us, and we very much thank you for your support and for recognizing Law Week.
I'd like to actually thank you for pointing this out this week and the importance of the rule of law. The rule of law, I think, is something that we take for granted in America, but it's more fundamental and more important than most of us realize. All you have to do is to go to a country that does not have a functioning rule of law to realize how essential it is for our prosperity. And I will point out that Friedrich Hayek has a great book, The Road to Serfdom, and he has a chapter on the rule of law in it, and I'd certainly recommend that chapter to anybody who wants to get a better appreciation of the rule of law. So thank you. Commissioner Davis, looks like you want to say something?
I hate it whenever he quotes a book. No, Jason, I appreciate you coming down. Is there a way, by chance, that we can maybe get a list of the lawyers that will be participating, just to give them a plug and maybe what their specialty is, to if somebody says, you know what, yeah, I really would like to talk to them about this specific area of law.
Sure, I don't have that with me presently, but I can certainly provide that to you if you like.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know whether we can post that to help facilitate this on the website, the county's website, to promote what you're trying to do. I think that's great. And I know that if somebody, was looking at a specific area, to see to that you'll have some representation there with a name behind it.
Sure, and you can also go to the Indian River County Bar Association website, which does have a list of all lawyers in the county, and it's actually broken down by specialty. Okay. But I can also provide you with a list of lawyers who are participating in Law Week. It's quite extensive, but
great.
I can get that to you today or tomorrow.
Looking forward to it.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keep going.
Congratulations, thank you.
We next have a presentation by Roberta J. Barker regarding Operation Medicine Cabinet. Good morning, Officer Barker. How are you today?
Good morning, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me a few minutes. This operation is an operation that was started a few years ago by a wonderful lady in Collier County called Vieira Little. Operation Medicine Cabinet is a program where we take in unused or expired medications so that we don't flush them down the toilet, we don't put them in the landfill, and we get them out of the wrong hands. When we started this a few years ago, we ended up with about 40 pounds. And last year, we succeeded with 680 pounds of medication that we took in for the whole year. It's a wonderful program. However, the DEA has really taken over the program now. It's really called the DEA Take Back Initiative, which is a wonderful thing, too, because what they do is they take the medications for us, and even with Operation Medicine Cabinet, we destroy it by burning it in a closed container. So we don't let it out in the air, and it doesn't get anywhere. It goes into a closed container. So the program is outstanding. I gave you flyers, and I will leave flyers in the front lobby for folks on the locations that we're going to be on April 30th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We also take medications during the week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 for the public in the front lobby of our station. If they can't get to these donation spots, or if you can't come to the station, we will come and get them. But that's if you really can't come to the station to bring them. We do not take sharps. Sharps can go to the health department next door on the second floor, and we suggest you don't bring liquids. There are ways to dispose of medications if you can't get to us at all. I forgot the name of it, but the way you do it is you put it in a bag with kitty litter, or you put it in with coffee grinds in a sandwich bag. You grind it up, and then you put it in a box in the landfill. We don't suggest that. We have plenty of locations coming up, and like I say, you can bring it to the sheriff's office front lobby. So I thank you for the time to just get the word out so that we can get this medication off the street, since it is such a big issue today as it is.
I just wanted to point out, Deputy Barker, you forgot an important element of all of this. You mentioned Vera starting this program on the other side of the state, and you mentioned the DEA.
Yes.
But you forgot to mention Deputy Sheriff Roberta Barker.
Oh, well.
And I wanted to recognize you, because when this program first came out, it was lightheartedly taken, and you had the true belief that this could make the difference. You had the volunteers make boxes, and I know that the first collection was a little light, didn't meet expectations, but you've brought this program here in Indian River County to a very impressive height, and I want you to know that I personally appreciate all of your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is a good program. I like seeing 680 pounds is a lot. We did last year, so I really want to see a whole bunch this year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'll now entertain a motion for the approval of the regular meeting minutes of March 15th, 2011.
So moved.
We have a motion from Commissioner O'Brien, a second from Commissioner Flesher. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Move to the consent agenda. I'll just note that 8C, as Commissioner O'Brien said before, is the revived 8C with one item removed. So we're not adding anything to fool the public or anything on that one. Anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Move approval, motion to approve from Commissioner Flesher, a second from Commissioner Davis. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Moving on, we're all the way down to departmental matters. Office of Management and Budget, Children's Services. This will be led by Jason Brown. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. The item that we have here before you today is a recommendation for funding allocation for the Children's Services agencies under the county's Children's Services Ordinance. Each year at this time we typically bring this forward because we have to get ahead of the process as that process is beginning underway for the Children's Services Advisory Committee to allocate these dollars to Children's Services agencies within the county. What we need to do to that is provide the overall allocation so that they know how much money they're working with and awarding those funds to the agencies. The county staff today is recommending an allocation for next fiscal year of $600,000. That's down about 13% from the current year funding of $691,290. And I'm available for any questions.
Commissioner Wheeler.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. One, I'd like to make it clear that, this is kind of setting the bar for the workshops in July, but this isn't set in concrete. So the real arguments on this, pro and con, would take place in July at the workshops. And secondly, a question, Jason, is why is this the only charitable organization or that we do that we've brought forward? There's several others that we fund on an annual basis. Why would they all be included in the same criteria?
We have a nonprofit funding policy that was adopted a few years ago that sets a fixed amount for the plain nonprofit funds. The others are quasi-nonprofits that are performing a function that otherwise the county would perform. Usually we have contracts with those entities. The other nonprofit section, I would say, is the tourist development agencies, and we have a separate process where we go before the Tourist Development Committee Board with that first. So each has its own different process, and this one is unique from the rest.
So my only point is, though, is again, this won't be effective whatever happens until July, and it's kind of like we're leading out with one over the others. I think everything that we deal with in the budget process will be on the table in July at the workshop. So.
Yes, that's correct. We provide this number up front so that we can give it to the Children's Services Advisory Committee so that they know how much money that they'll be working with. And then their recommendations will be brought back and then included within the budget recommendation in July.
Mr. Chairman, if I could further clarify a little bit to Commissioner Wheeler's concern, there's a very detailed, involved process with the Children's Services Committee. Their first step is there's a needs review subcommittee, and this subcommittee goes back to the comprehensive need analysis we did for the whole county 5 years ago, and they review that, and then they look at how the needs, in particular for children, have changed over the years, and then the needs review subcommittee then presents a list of priorities for the programs that will most appropriately address those needs in the community. Then following that, the grant review subcommittee is in charge of reviewing all the applications that the agencies provide, and they go through those, they rank them, they rank how they address the needs assessment, and then they make a recommendation for funding. So at that point, just so the agencies know what's available, I think is why staff is bringing this forward now, to allow that whole process to take place, because it takes quite a while. It's a lot of effort from this committee, and they put a lot of time and effort into this at no cost to the county. They also, in addition to going through all that, the grant review subcommittee, every month they interview some of the programs and the agencies as a due diligence follow-up to make sure that those agencies are performing how they were supposed to, that they're on track, and at the end of the year they do present an annual report with measurable outcomes. So this committee, I think we get great bang for our buck for the amount of work they do. It's very much like how we do some of our other private partner relationships, where they bring in an extensive amount of volunteer hours through all the different agencies. And so with the core funding from the county to get them going, we parlay that into multiples of service for the community. I think Children's Services for what we expend is we get a great benefit for the community. So anyway, Commissioner Wheeler, I think partly to answer your question is that they just need to know the funding amount as they go through the grant review process so they can make those determinations.
Thank you. Commissioner Fletcher?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, have we received any information from Mr. Nolte's office as to where we're going to be at? I know we might have some preliminary information, but the final numbers aren't in yet, correct?
No, the property appraiser, in accordance with Florida statutes, is supposed to provide the county with his first preliminary estimate June 1st, and then his certified tax roll comes July 1st. We've had conversations with him. He's made general indications, but obviously they're still working through their process, are reluctant to give, definitive numbers as they're still working on those. We're hearing between 5 and 10% decrease, maybe a 10% decrease, but obviously none of that's official as they're still working through and trying to certify their tax roll. They'll be working on that up through July 1st, basically.
Well, last year, I think the preliminary estimates were a little high, and it was good because it gave all of the nonprofits and the constitutionals an option of knowing a little in advance. And I know, and thank you, Joe sent out the letters a little early too, and everybody brought in their budgets. But the concern here is that if we're estimating between 5 and 10%, and the 10% might be a little high, well, why are we looking at 13% for children's services at this point?
Well, let me say this. One of the reasons we're looking at it is because there's certain other areas that we don't think will be reduced that much, like your, we think 5% you'll get from, your public safety. And so what we're trying to do is, if we're only going to get 5 there, and we think it's between 5 and 10, we have to make that difference up somewhere else, and that's why we did make that recommendation. But it's up to the board. We just to bring this forward is up to the board to decide. We just think we're going to have a very hard year because we've had 3 years of double-digit cuts, and now we're in our 4th year, so it's getting extremely hard to find the money. I mean, we're really going to be struggling with what we can do. We've eliminated 240 positions, and it hasn't been easy. And we're hoping not to have to eliminate many positions this year. So it's just going to be a very tough year.
But it just seems to me, and the reason why I brought it up is that it appears we're being a bit draconian without knowing the true numbers, and asking for 13% reduction, and not knowing the numbers, and knowing that maybe perhaps other areas may not be able to cut as deep, that we're then pushing all the weight on children's services, a very proactive entity, and one that's designed around preventative maintenance.
The board could, we did this a few years ago, you could say, okay, if you a few years ago, what we're trying to do is give the committee a benchmark so that when they go through the packets, they recommend, funding to reach that benchmark. You could say, okay, we'll do recommendations based on 10%, based on a 5% reduction. So you have a few options. That was done a few years ago. That might be, or if the board so wishes, keep funding where it is. But I will say that it's going to be a hard year if you want to reduce taxes. If the board does not want to do that, that's up to you too.
Thank you.
No, that's Mr. Baird did. In my conversations, I had several conversations with several individuals, and I appreciate them taking the time out to about how passionate they are about this. And my response to them is, go ahead and prepare for the 13%, as I said, and then Mr. Jacoby, in our conversation, what everybody else gets cut by, maybe not try to make it all up on the back of children's services, perhaps. And then even one step forward was, tell me what programs are going to have to be eliminated because of the decisions. And as it comes forward and as we go through the process, I think we'll be able to make some intelligent decisions, because right now is, I don't think anybody really knows. Other than we know it's not going to be as much as it was, and we'll just have to look at the process and see what it produces on the other side.
And I had very similar conversations with Mr. Jacoby and a couple others, and I'll take this opportunity to thank them very much for the work that they do, and say that I think on behalf of the Board of County Commissioners that if there is any cut, it's not reflective at all of the work that you've done for the community. We very much appreciate that. I think it's more reflective of the fact that we do not want to put any other tax burden on the other members of our community. I do believe there's some people who might want to speak on this issue today, and I'd be happy to have you speak, so come on up. Kip, beginning, name and address for the record, please.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kip Jacoby, 1036 Indian Mountain Trail in the county. I am serving currently as your chairman of your grant subcommittee, and Commissioner O'Brien went through the process and and actually stole a few comments that I was going to go through for you. So we'll be efficient with my comments, and I won't get as much into that. But it is a really healthy, critical review process that we go through. And I'll start by inviting each of the commissioners to our June 3rd and June 4th review process, where we go through and review and critique the agencies, a lot of questions and answers. It is a public noticed meeting, of course, as we live by the Sunshine Law, so you're welcome to join, all 5 of you, and review and see the process and learn maybe a little bit more about the agencies and the process that we go through. We do look for appropriate measurable outcomes, so there is a strong accountability for the dollars that we allocate for the county on your behalf. We do review for the financial condition, fiscal management, for appropriate balance between administrative dollars and program investment dollars. And I feel very comfortable in telling you that the agencies that we do fund rate very highly in their investment in the program dollars. They're not just funding themselves, they're really turning program dollars back for the community. As we did speak, and I really appreciate the time that you provided for me over the last few days, I did want to go through a couple of, I'm a numbers guy, so I like to go and get into the numbers if I can, and I appreciate the help from Joe and Jason in giving me some information. The history of the ordinance actually began back in 1997, 98. I'm not going to go through all of it for you, so bear with me. But I think there's a misconception that the original funding balance in the first full fiscal year that we started out was at the $293,000 level. And I think there's a misconception that that's the place where we start as the baseline for the funding. But when you go back into the ordinance, you actually see that the intent was to provide a 4-year phase-in for the ordinance, which is set at .125 mils. So that by the time the 4 years had run in the phase-in and we were into the 5th year, our budget was allocated at $900,000, which was 84% of our millage allotment at the cap level. Over the years, and as we find ourselves today in our current budget cycle, our funding has declined from the $900,000 fully phased-in level down to the $691,000 level that we're working with in today's budget. And so the 84% of millage dropped dramatically to just 39% of our millage that could be allocated out of the annual budget. So that's a dramatic drop at a time when you look at the county population at the phase-in period to the level we have today. Our county has grown by some 25%, and yet the Children's Services budget has declined by 23%. So what we find is a pretty significant drop in that allocated budget, and not necessarily really in following the intent of the ordinance when it was initially established. In addition, hope you're grabbing all these numbers. What we find over the last few years as we dropped, back in 2006, 2007, and we moved to the following 2007, 2008 year, the millage actually grew by 4%, and yet the county services was cut by 9%. The next year, the millage dropped by 6%, but the allocation to Children's Services dropped by 19.8%. Following year, a drop of 9.5% in the millage, or the taxable values of the county, and yet we were cut by 13%. So that, as you can see, drives where we end up today at just 39% of our allotted millage opportunity. So that's kind of the history. The baseline is really at a higher level, and I would ask that you consider that in your deliberations on the allocations. And then as we get into, I'm trying to figure out which glasses here. As we get into looking at some of the specific programs and the investment of those dollars, I think it's important to understand that we're working with preventative dollars. I think, you know, you can looked at a number of different studies. You know that you can invest in cheaper dollars today rather than paying the deep end dollars on the tail end to deal with the remediation of an issue. And I wanted to highlight just a few of the agencies. They provided some specific information that can help you zero in on that type of thought process. Out of Healthy Families, today, as we are, as compared to just 6 years ago, we're serving 184 less children than we were back in 2006. The average cost on the preventative side that we're funding is about $1,700 per child. And yet, when you deal with a child abuse victim that's not gone through a preventative program, the cost balloons to $64,000. $1,700 versus $64,000. And that is comprised of child welfare services, hospitalization, juvenile justice costs. So you can see just with Healthy Families, they have a significant impact by those investment dollars. On the Children's Services, the Child Care Resources program, the information they provided that for every dollar we invest, that saves $13 in other services later that are now avoided. So that's a 13-for-1 payback. CASEL, program that provides assistance with children in abuse situations. 94% of their program helps avert children going into the juvenile justice program and through the court system. That savings of $4,000 per child saved in the past year under a pilot program $200,000 in court costs, not including the foster care costs that society would incur. So again, a dramatic impact on the investment of dollars. And then the fourth program I just wanted to highlight, and I'm just highlighting four. We fund a number of different programs, and they all have the same kind of story and statistics that can be brought to bear. Big Brothers Big Sisters. For Department of Juvenile Justice incarceration runs at just under $24,000 a year per child. Their program and the funding for the 104 children that they worked with during this past year, and their program basically works with children that have parents that are incarcerated. So their goal is to try to break the cycle in families in which children follow their parents' footsteps, and so they're trying to break that cycle. The 104 children that they serve and work with, based on the success rate of a 70% level, saved 73 children over the years per year from being arrested and incarcerated, and that's a savings of about $1.75 million. So that you can see, for just the $691,000 that we're investing this year, it's a dramatic impact in real dollars today and in the future. I'd like to kind of conclude my comments away from the numbers. I think there is a real, nationally, of course, there's a real hard look at the budget cycles that we're in, and I've told you all individually, I commend the commissioners and Joe and Jason for what they've done with the county. We are well set to weather the storms and work through any budgetary situation that we've worked with, and you clearly responded to the citizens. And as a citizen, I appreciate that. I think there is a way, though, that we can continue to serve those citizens in this difficult economic time that we're in by helping them through, by maintaining the budget that we can in this area. We're not funding bridges to nowhere. We're funding bridges of opportunity for children today, for their parents today to become productive citizens for today and for the future. And lastly, I just wanted to quote the noted psychiatrist Carl Menninger when he said, "What we do to our children today, children do to our society tomorrow." So I would be happy, after those comments of the numbers, if I can address any comments about the subcommittee process or the programs that we work with.
Kip, I would just like to respond a little bit. We had a similar conversation in my office, but when you talk about, again, the work that you do and that all of the groups that you work with do is great, and we commend you for it, and the community is much better for it. But the argument that you make on the need for your budget to be maintained is the same argument that the affordable housing groups are going to make, the mental health groups, almost every other service, and we can then transfer that to the governmental services, which we believe are essential services, from the sheriff's department, fire, EMS, to roads. I mean, a bad road with a bad pothole that leads us to an accident and a death is, the reduction of that budget is just as bad as a reduction in the children's services budget. And the other reality of it is that if we do increase our millage rate, increase our taxes, that burden is going to be borne significantly by an already struggling lower middle class and middle class who can't afford any other burden at this time. So these are the type of things we're balancing. And you closed with the phrase about what we do to our children today. Well, what I believe nationally is what we're doing to our children today is putting together an unsustainable debt which will crush them in the future. I believe, and it's borne out to some degree this week when the United States AAA debt was now put on a negative watch by Standard & Poor's. That's on the road to Greece, not on the path to prosperity. And I believe that if we continue to do the hard thing now, limit government and limit more to just essential services while cooperating with groups like yours, that will put ourselves on the path to prosperity, which will grow the economic pie. I believe we're on a path right now which might just keep it stagnant, which will not work in a democracy and will not be good for the children of the future. So there's the other side.
I totally agree with your comments on a national level. I share the same concerns, and I wish that our national leaders were taking the same approach that you as the commissioners have taken for our county. Just in a little bit of a rebuttal, though, our county is not in the same situation as the federal government is. Because of the stewardship and the accountability that you've had over these past few years to staff, to your predecessors, and to you all, we're in a good position. We're well reserved. We don't have the same kinds of issues that the national government has. And I believe it's important to not just look at 1 year in and of itself. And I think the statistics show that if you look for the long term and treat these dollars as investments in the future, that you can identify that there really is a payback for this. And it's going to save, for example, the sheriff maybe his budget down the road, or it's going to cost him in terms of additional deputies and additional dollars that he'll have to spend in the years to come because we didn't spend those preventative dollars today. So that's my rebuttal.
Thank you very much, Kip.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kip.
Anybody else care to speak on this issue? Oh, okay. We'll get you next, Renee, after Aaron. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll be quick because Kip covered a lot, but I do want to tell all of you that I appreciate the time you gave to our committee members over the last week to talk about this issue, and I know that there were a number of questions that were addressed during that time that I wanted to address with the Commission today, as I've tried to find some answers for the questions that I left your office with. I do have to say that the role of the committee is very important in this process, and we have done, we feel, our part over the last number of years to narrow down the number of organizations that we fund because they were not giving us the measurable outcomes that we felt the taxpayers deserved with their tax dollars going towards the organizations, which we feel like, because as Kip's the numbers guy, I'm more of the measurable outcomes person on that committee, and I really look very hard at each application each year to make sure that when an organization comes back before us, not only are they meeting their measurable outcomes, but that they're not throwing easy outcomes at us for year after year, just kind of maintaining a level, that they're really reaching, and they're reaching to improve these children's lives. I do think that it's important to note that we know that there are taxpayers paying for these programs. We're taxpayers ourselves. And so we're sitting there without kind of a chip in the game and just trying to analyze how are we getting the best bang for our dollar from a county level. We do feel like it's an investment in the years to come, and that myself as a younger taxpayer in this county am very concerned about what it is going to mean 10 to 15 years from now for my family if our taxes are increased at that point in time because the problems are beyond help. And I think that's something that we need to take into consideration. I know that there was a concern from a number of commissioners about the administrative expenses of these programs, and that people are concerned that we have executive directors living high on the hog and, you know, making a ton of money, and those are not the programs that we fund. Nationally, that we are asked to keep administrative expenses in organizations below 20%. The majority of our organizations are between 10 and 15%. You see that sometimes go a little bit higher because of the staffing needs required by some of these organizations, 24-hour-a-day staffing needs. So you may see administrative expenses go up in some of our organizations, but they're very much held accountable every year when they come before our committee. And they're not only held accountable to us, most of these organizations receive the primary amount of their funds from individual donors in this community who have been tapped out. And that's why we're really, you know, every year we look at these organizations and we say, how much more can you do? How much more fundraising can you do? How many more donors can you go to? And they're taking the hit everywhere, as is everyone in our economy, which is why these dollars are still important, even though they're going out and busting their butt and really trying to make money in other places. But private donors hold them accountable to those high administrative costs as well. Private donors don't want to be paying an organization that has administrative costs of 25 or 30%. They want to make sure their dollars are going to programs, and that's where our dollars are going. We also had a conversation about revenue streams, and beyond just fundraising, are these organizations charging the people that they serve for their services? I have heard back from 5 of our organizations at this point. We fund 15 different organizations, even though some of those organizations have multiple projects. I've heard back from 5 of our organizations, and they do require a fee for service. I know that some of our organizations, just because of my familiarity with the organizations, I know that some of them do not charge fees for service. They really don't lend themselves to that in some instances. But I think it's important to note that when people can pay for these services, they are, and it's at a reduced rate, of course, because childcare, for instance, for an infant may cost $200 a week. Our families are within the poverty level to 200% of the poverty level, so they may pay up to $60 a week. That's significant for these families, but it is a portion of the overhead, and it's taking care, and it's making them have an investment in the program as well. We also see that fee on some of our after-school programs. These after-school programs are key to keeping kids off the street, to keeping teen pregnancy down, to keeping burglaries down in those hours when parents are not home. So we do see a difference in that area. But you can't always charge a fee for service, even though the parents are very excited and honored that their kids are able to be part of these programs. There have been staffing cuts in all of these agencies. About 95% of the agencies that I've heard from so far have seen staffing cuts in the last 4 years. I know that that's something that's happened at the county level. It's something that we expect to happen on the agency level. The staffing cuts have been in administration primarily, and they've done everything they can to keep their programs operating at the level that they were, because each one of the programs we fund has a waiting list. Sometimes up to 200 kids are on a waiting list for each of these 15 different agencies. So we're not just talking about, the fact that there's empty spots in these after-school programs. There are people that are dying to get their kids in these programs because they know it will change their stars. They know it will change the path that their life will take. We also hear sometimes that what we provide and the services that these organizations provide are nothing but glorified babysitting and some field trips. If it was as easy as that, it would be a heck of a lot cheaper. It's about providing trained professionals to work with children who come from disadvantaged circumstances to try and move them out of that cycle and out of that path. And that's where the cost comes in. If it was about some basketballs for an extra pickup game after school or about some toys in a classroom, it just wouldn't be as important. And usually there are donors in terms of just your average everyday person who might not feel like they can give at a high level to these organizations, but they will donate their goods. And so those aren't the problems that we're facing today. It's also been suggested that because of these programs, we're perpetuating the problem by funding more programs such as these. And I just wanted to comment on some of the things that we know. What we do know is that if your parent is incarcerated, there is a 70% chance that you will be incarcerated. We do know that if your mother is a teen mother, the chances of you being a teen mother increase. We know that if your parents did not graduate from high school, your chances of graduating decrease. We know that the fundamentals in life for success are built from ages 0 to 6. And if these children from 0 to 6 are kept in a different home every day without a primary caregiver who is educating them, they will not have the fundamentals necessary to be successful in kindergarten, let alone throughout their life. We do know that if you are a victim of abuse, you will likely repeat the pattern. We know that we are intervening in this cycle for the children served, thereby giving them a chance to break that cycle that they were born into, because we know that our programs have proven successes, which our committee holds them to each and every year as we go through this review process. We know that high school students who graduate from the programs go on to achieve 4-year degrees. We know that adolescents in our programs report becoming sexually active later than those not involved in these programs. We know that our students avoid experimentation with drugs and substance abuse altogether because of our programs. We know that children thrive when they reach elementary school and go on through high school because of our early education programs. And we know that families are avoiding the child welfare system and the dependency system because they are trained in proper parenting. Children are not here today. Unlike some of the other issues that come up before the commission when they deal with senior issues, when they deal with our neighborhoods, the children aren't here today because hopefully they're in school or hopefully they're in good child care programs. But we can't pull them out, we can't bring them here, but we serve hundreds of them in this community through these programs. And our committee has seen the need increase every year, and it is not the fault of these children that they are born into the situations that they're born into, that they have the needs that they have. I want to see us continue to put the kids in these programs because I feel that they are truly diversionary. I feel that they are an investment in our tax dollars. And I do know that it's a very difficult time, and as a committee, we're not by any means advocating an increase of the millage rate and an increase of taxes on this community. We know that there's $56 million in a general revenue reserve fund. We know that in the past, this commission has voted that $5.9 million of that be devoted to budget stabilization dollars. We feel this is the type of emergency that you invest in and keep us at level funding because it will be an investment in our future, and that those dollars are there for just this reason. We're talking about $91,000 at this point in time, and we feel that this is a huge investment for that $91,000 additional dollars that we would like to see kept on the table this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Renzi? Name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, and good morning. Renee Renzi, Waverly Place, Vero Beach. I volunteer as a tutor over at the Hibiscus Children's Village, and I'm aware that they are now in the midst of their own fundraising effort. They have it annually. These children are there under court order, not because they've messed up, but because their parents have messed up. And I was wondering if the village gets any part of this budget that you're discussing today for children's services.
Joe, do you know if...
At this time, they have applied. I believe they're going to be applying for the RFP that's currently out.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
There's currently an RFP out for this next fiscal year, and Hibiscus is applying for the funds for funding of a program.
As part of their fundraising effort?
Yes.
At the moment, they don't get anything, though?
No, they don't. They haven't applied.
Wow.
Well, they did apply 1 year, but we weren't adding any new agencies at that time because of budget cuts.
And this year, they're trying to raise $2 million, so any help, I'm sure, would be very, very welcome. It's a very impressive facility over on 12th Street. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your service, Ms. Renzi.
Anyone else care to speak on this issue?
I'm Brad Bernauer for Children's Services. I'm the Executive Director. And I agree with Commissioner Solari. I'm wholeheartedly against large government. And I voted that way. I'm not ashamed to say that. However, we're talking about children in this particular item. And it's hard for me to equate children to bridges and roads and sand on a beach. And when it comes down to priorities, I have to lean towards the children. They're going to be here a lot longer than a lot of those structures that we're trying to maintain, through the years and keep pouring money into. When you're doing a bridge or a road, you're looking for quality materials that you're going to use for building. And that's what we're trying to provide for these children, are quality programs and teaching them how to live so that they can be productive members of our community, so that when we're all retired and they're running the show, that they'll be able to run the show intelligently and hopefully with as much compassion as we all have at this point in time. Basically, that's it.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one more point. I didn't make it evidently clearly enough before. I mean, again, if we raise taxes or use more tax dollars, it comes from somewhere. And it comes a large part from our lower middle class and middle class. And those families have children. And those families, I'm quite sure, are very often trying to do the best they can for their children. And I just see it as a lot of times it's government coming in and intervening in family life and saying, we know better than you do, parents, where to spend your limited dollars. And while I'm not trying to strip away the children's services, and we'll be supporting it at some level, I just have a very hard time taking more money out of the pockets of people who have good uses for their money, including raising their kids and doing the best they can for their children, and saying that I know how to do that better than you do. So that's just trying to explain it better.
And I'm not in favor of taking any more money out of my pocket. I appreciate that.
And I don't know if you have kids. If you don't,
Actually,
I don't care
my wife
for you.
does that as well.
It's the parents with children who would spend this money on their children, and it just makes their life that much more difficult.
I guess it comes down to prioritizing where we're spending everything and what's truly most important.
Again, I think we all, appreciate the work that you do and everybody with every single agency that's before us today. And thank you. We'll move on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just some comments, please. I think this board, I think we need to start looking at things a little bit differently. I don't think anybody can criticize us over the last 3 years for the cuts that we've made to try to keep taxes down and provide a level of service to the community that the community expects, deserves, and needs. But I think we've reached a point where further cuts start becoming counterproductive, where we degrade our society, we do not adequately fund the health, safety, and welfare of the community. If we continue cutting, this will lead to more costly solutions in the future. And I think at some point, we need to say there's a minimal level of service that we need to provide, and that we will find a way to provide it. And I think we're here now. As you've heard, these programs are not summer camps. These are critical to the health, safety, and welfare of our children. These programs deal with things such as teen pregnancy, dropout prevention, substance abuse prevention, other mental health issues. They target high-risk, expectant, and new mothers to try to increase the likelihood of positive health outcomes. These are core programs that deal with health, safety, and welfare of our children. Just a little information. Last year in the 2009-2010 annual report, the money we funded served 8,092 children at an average cost of $94.71 per child. And that's for a full year of program. So $94.71 per child. If we take those same 8,092 children and serve them with the proposed $600,000 allocation, we're down to $74.15 per child. We currently pay the Humane Society $83 for every stray dog they pick up. So what we're proposing here is to pay less for a year-round program to keep a child out of danger. We're proposing to pay less for that than we pay to pick up a stray dog. I don't find that is what we should be doing, as stewards of the community and to protect the health, safety, and welfare. I think we can do this without raising taxes. And one other point I'd like to make is last week, this board voted to spend $1.3 million taxpayer dollars to purchase a little over 1 acre of right-of-way. And the rationale for that $1.3 million was because it was the right thing to do, because of what government was doing. Well, I propose to this board that the right thing to do is to spend more on the health, safety, and welfare of our children than what we spend to pick up a stray dog. So we heard from Ms. Garral, and I think you all have seen our comprehensive financial reports. We have over $33 million unassigned in our reserve account for the general fund. $33 million unassigned dollars. I think if there's ever a time that we need to use reserve funds, it will be this year. We've cut and cut and cut. Further cuts will lower our quality of service, lower our lifestyle, impact the health, safety, and welfare of our children. And I think it's time that we now utilize that reserve fund we've built up. We have a budget stabilization reserve policy that allows us to do this. And I would like to make the motion that we use $100,000 from our $33 million of unassigned general fund reserves, and we appropriate a total of $700,000 of funding for children's services for 2011-2012.
Second with discussion.
We have a motion from Commissioner O'Brien, a second from Commissioner Fleischer.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Fleischer.
And I appreciate Commissioner O'Brien's words. Just want to echo a point or two. We've heard from some of the members that are the driving force in being the good stewards of the children, the future of Indian River County. In my past profession in law enforcement, hope I said that correctly for all of you, there were many junctures that if there had not been an alternative, an aversion, a diversion for the individuals, there was a one-way trip for those youth, and that was over to the correctional facility, then transport them out to Farmers Boulevard in St. Lucie. And from there they wound up at Indian River Correctional. And, you just start thinking about the justification of what we're doing right for children, what we're doing right for the future. If it not is for that, then this is an enterprise fund. This is an enterprise fund, not in the customary sense, but an enterprise fund in human resources, the very resources that we strive to maintain, the future of Indian River County. The individuals that are at risk, that wasn't discussed, many of the aversionary plans and programs that are available, they're very important. And I believe if we wane on those plans, then we're going to see the sheriff have to increase his numbers. He's going to have to expand the jail. He's going to have to expand the amount of human resources that he has within the jail. Gave a proclamation this morning to find individuals operating that jail. Well, there'll be more numbers there, and they'll be in green, and that's going to cost dollars. And we're also going to have to look at other plans to make the prevention that Children's Services has been providing for. We're going to have to look at another means. Look, I'm all for less government, but I believe in increasing or maintaining this budget for Children's Services. We are, in essence, decreasing government. Again, I don't know if the sheriff wants to chime in on the great benefit. I know he stands on some of the councils, and I see many members in the audience that do serve on those councils and serve in a volunteer function. But they know the value. Whether they have children themselves or not is immaterial. It's about the children of Indian River County. And I greatly appreciate everyone's efforts here today.
Commissioner Davis.
Yes, I appreciate Commissioner O'Brien's stance on this, and this, I'm of similar opinion, but a little different in timing. And I said this to Ms. Dapp, Ms. Grawl, and Mr. Jacoby. I believe all three of you pretty much said the same thing. And, you know, yes, we are in good financial standing, we are in good financial health, and yes, we do have reserves for rainy days. Unfortunately, when you look at the assessed value for the real estate, right now we're setting our budget based here in a little bit in June on preliminary figures for the assessed value of real estate as of January 1st, 2011. Now, the question that I have to ask before I start going into reserves is, what do I see happening for the real estate values for January 1st, 2012? In the business that I am in, I do have what I'd call my ear to the ground as far as values, and right now I'm cautiously optimistic that it's not going to keep dropping as hard for January 1st, 2012. But, Commissioner, I can't support your motion yet. Once I see a bottom, and am sure there's a bottom, then perhaps tapping into reserves is an option. But I think in the past several years, had we used some of that thought process, we would be in a bind right now. And as much as it is unpleasant, my goal perhaps for the Children's Services is, if in the event there is a cut, it's not one that we're going to have that's any more distributed to the rest of the other parts of the county as best we possibly can. And I think I told everybody that whenever you met with me. And so, Commissioner, I can't support your motion today. I do support your logic, and I understand what you're saying, but until I get a better grasp of exactly where the assessed values are going from January 1st of 11 to 12, and then perhaps I might be able to support you in that endeavor.
Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, you know, it's very difficult to sit here and take on children or people with hardships, or and I agree with Wes, I agree with what Peter said to a large extent. But also I got to ask myself, you know, when the federal government goes in and does something, generally the lower income people don't pay taxes to get that done. They pay a very small percentage. I know of one person that paid in $502 last year. That's $7,500 back. And this happens regularly and has been happening for years, that you get more back than you pay in depending on your income. But those same people that may get a break from the federal government on their taxes when they spend all this money on social programs, a lot of those are property owners. They don't get a break on the property taxes. They got to pay them every year. Because we aren't the federal government, we can't subsidize the property taxes. And if they don't own a house and they're renting, they're picking up the value of that property, the increase or decrease in value, when they pay their rent every month. And so, you know, it's across the board, but a lot of the lower income people that have small homes have to pay property taxes. And I've said for many years, one of the most difficult problems I have sitting here is the fact that I sit here and I get to take your money and then I get to decide where it does the most good. I'd like to see everybody that's involved and I'm not, this is no reflection on the people that are involved that give above and beyond what the vast majority of people give in this community or any community to make things better. But and I think the board, and from what I've seen with the Children's Services, it's not unlike the United Way board. You've got people there that care, they're intelligent, they look into things, they're fiscally responsible, they're conservative. So it's not a shot at any of that. But the bottom line to all of this is we keep spending and spending and spending and spending, and for the last 30 or 40 years, across the board, from the local level to the federal level, we keep spending. We spend more money on schools, more money on the Great Society that Lyndon Johnson started. Have things gotten better? Is there more crime? Are there more deaths? Is there more juvenile delinquency? Is our educational standards gone down, down, down? People have to get involved, and throwing money at things isn't just the way to do it. And there are, and unfortunately, all of these things have been grouped together, from potholes to dogs and everything else. This whole thing is grouped together across society, and we deal with it locally. And I think basically we do a pretty good job here locally, and I think basically this community in particular is very generous. But at this point in time, and then Peter's not only asking to keep this at the same level, he wants to increase it. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but I think my responsibility and government's responsibility is to take care of those services that people individually can't take care of. And that's building highways, law enforcement, and you can even throw education in there, although more and more people are getting frustrated with that system, and homeschooling. But at some point in time, people have to quit standing up and getting in between consequences and irresponsibility, and people are going to get hurt like they do in war or anything else. So I know I'm just very frustrated with this, and it's very tough to sit here and say, it's a great program. I'd like to support it. But I think it should be supported by the general public and not by government. I don't think government should be coming and taxing people to create different programs. And a lot of the history of some of these programs is they start out with good funding and good people and good intentions, and then those intentions kind of go by the side. You can't find people to support your cause, so you end up coming to the government and asking for money from the government. And at some point in time, we've got to pull this in, and I can't support Peter's motion because of that general philosophy and the history I've had in the last 50 years looking at where things have progressed.
And not surprisingly, I won't be supporting this motion again, not because I don't believe in the work that the people are doing with these groups, but I'll notice one other thing. These numbers aren't going to be right because I'm doing them right here, but if we have a population of about 140,000, which is skewed to the elder, we have a youth group of maybe 20,000 students. And one person mentioned that we had 8,092 youth serviced by these groups, and that there are 15 agencies with 200 kids on the waiting list. That's another 3,000. So roughly, we have half the kids in this community taking advantage of these programs. That tells me that something's broken down, that things have not worked the way people thought when these programs were getting started 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And I end up with the question of each time, again, we take money out of the parents' pockets to give it to government to help other kids, are we weakening the job that those parents are doing and actually making government more and more responsible for these children as opposed to the parents? And that's, at the end, where I'm falling down on this. So, unless there are any final comments?
Yeah, please, Mr. Chairman. Couple points is one, all due respect, Commissioner Wheeler, we're not the federal government. And I know they have a lot of problems there, but we don't have those problems. We are financed, we have reserves, we've been fiscally prudent. You mentioned government should do things people can't do, like build a highway. I would put to you that you don't want to know where these kids live that these programs help. You would be terrified to walk in that house. These kids cannot help themselves. It's not my kids that are in these programs. It's not Commissioner Davis's. It's not Commissioner Fletcher's. Our kids aren't in these programs. The kids that these programs are helping can't do it themselves. Their lifestyle is something, in our worst nightmares, we can't comprehend what these kids go through. And I can tell you that. My wife is a teacher, sees these kids day in, day out, and we just sitting here, we can't realize what these kids go through on a day-to-day basis. For a lot, and I think the sheriff will back me on this, for a lot of these kids, every day is a matter of survival, not am I going to get a new present or a new toy. It's am I going to live to the next day without being shot or stabbed or something bad happening. These kids cannot do this for themselves. And again, we're not asking for an additional tax. The motion is to use $100,000 out of $33 million of unassigned reserves. We have money set aside for budget stabilization. We have money set aside for disaster and emergency reactions. We have money set aside for economic development. So we've covered those other things. We have $33 million of unassigned reserve. I'm asking to spend $100,000 to fund children's services. Commissioner Davis, I agree with you on the timing. Absolutely, the last 3 years, I think we've voted consistently to not go to reserves. I just strongly feel now that more cuts are counterproductive, that we're going to end up costing more by doing that than if we spend the dollars now and save in the future. So, this is bare local government providing for the health, safety, and welfare. It doesn't get, in my mind, any clearer that this is critical to help our community and help these kids. So that's
Commissioner. No, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, we're having this lengthy discussion, and a lot of folks stepping up to the podium, and I'm starting to count the numbers up here. But what about the numbers on page 22 that we just looked at on consent agenda and just said that's fine? We said that's fine, and I understand that the funding there was for some necessary moves from the contingency fund, $33,000 from the general fund reserved for contingency for road and bridge, $54,000 for Meals on Wheels.
That was killed. We changed that. That's no longer being done. We took that out on the amended budget amendment. That wasn't included.
Okay. This is going forward, and this is on consent agenda, and we're debating the likelihood for the future of Indian River County with the children that are at risk. As Commissioner Bryan said clearly, the children don't have a choice. Some of them are waking up in the morning in survival mode, and I had the opportunity to see them in the morning as they were going to school, and sometimes afraid of going to school because they were going to get reprisal there as well as at home when they come back home, and hiding in the woods. And I think we're just better than that. I think we're better than just placing people in incarceration, into punitive programs, and, we have to step up to the plate. We've heard from several of you throughout the year that, local government is good government, we're responsive government, we're the best form of government. Well, we have an option to prove it and allow this to go forward. But I guess I can count to 2 and count to 3, and some of you have children and some of you don't. And I commend you for the jobs of those who have children, of what you've done. But just remember, there are children that don't have people like you out there, that they're at risk. And we have to at least show that we are a civilization, not just a government, not just a town, and not just a local community. This is a civilization that we're supporting. Thank you.
Commissioners, I would like to point out.
Commissioner Davis, then Joe.
Just in looking at it, I can't make this decision right now without knowing the full picture of the rest of the, as far as the assessment on the other sides. I can't make that jump yet, Commissioner. I just want to let you know.
I understand, Commissioner.
Has been wanting to say
Yes, we sent out letters to all the constitutionals, all agencies, and all departments to cut their budget by 5%. And I just want you to be aware that, just full disclosure, I've already gotten calls from some constitutionals asking, saying, we want our 5% to come out of your reserves. Well, if I do that, we'll have a real problem in a few years. And so that has been brought up already by, when you start going, everyone wants us to do that, so we have to be careful with that. I'm not saying that you can't do it for just this item. I'm just saying that the outside exposure is everyone else will ask you to do it. But we only ask the departments to cut 5%. I don't want everyone to be aware of that.
Mr. Commissioner Wheeler.
Yeah, just to comment on what Commissioner Fleischer and also Peter have said. First, there's still $600,000 left in here. You're not shutting it off. And secondly, the final decision will be made in July. $100,000 isn't going to save the world, and it's not going to destroy the world. And you sit here and you pull on the heartstrings with the worst possible cases and scenarios you can come up with. And yes, I have seen this. I've seen it over the years. I've been in those houses. I've been in houses where parents didn't even know when their kids were born. But you can't solve everything and every evil in the world. And it's not like you're just shutting the water off and saying there's no more. We've got to make decisions. And I think there are some things that when you mix the whole thing here with stray dogs and consent agenda items, etc., you're making arguments, and it almost sounds like, you know what, we're just shutting this off, we don't care, and we may be voting against the survival of a human being or a child. And that's not the case. And some of these programs reach way down in and do some things that may save a child's life. Other things are things that assist and make life a little better for people. And I think but somebody's got to pay that bill. You know, government can't give anything away that it doesn't take from you to begin with. So it's not shutting this down. It's simply saying, let's take a harder look at it. Do we need to tighten down, be more conservative in how we approach these things? And the other thing is, 50 years ago, hardly any of these programs existed. And I can tell you what, life was a whole lot better 50 years ago as far as civility and social standards and neighbors and communities helping each other than it is today. Because everybody didn't look at the government and say, this is what I need from you and you owe me. They looked to their neighbors, they looked to their family, they looked to their churches, etc. So, the bottom line is we spend more and yet things are getting worse. And anyway, that's my observation. Whether I'm wrong or not, or right, that's my observation. But the bottom line is we aren't killing children here, and we aren't saving dogs at children's expense. It's a matter of budgetary things, how much money we have, who has to pay the bill, and where's the money coming from. And also setting policy and fiscal responsibility about what is responsible and what were these funds set aside for, and where do you start dipping into them.
Well, Jim, I think we probably covered this issue pretty well today. If it's okay, we'll go ahead with the vote. All in favor? Well, I'll restate the motion. There's a motion from Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Fleischer, to to add or take $100,000 from the reserves to give a total budget for the 2011-2012 children's services of $700,000. That's correct. Okay. All in favor of that motion? Aye. Aye. And that's all against? Aye. Aye. It fails 3-2. Solari, Wheeler, and Davis against.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to direct Children's Services to have the same benefit that was given to the constitutionals in years past, is to prepare for a 0, 5, and 10% reduction in their budget in the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, if you can amend that to 0, 5, 10, and 13, I'd be happy to support it.
Well, I base
Happy to second it.
the 10% on what is anticipated through David Nolte's office and what is anticipated through our administrator, and as well as...
That's fine. I'll be happy to second that motion. The motion, Commissioner Fleischer. Second from Commissioner Solari. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, everybody from the audience who participated today. Next up, Public Works. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. Yeah, just... The April 19th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, and we're up to a staff update, Sector 3 Beach Renourishment. Good morning, Mr. Gray.
Good morning, James Gray, County Coastal Engineer. This update is on the Sector 3 Beach Restoration Project, and it's a continuing update which we've been giving to the board for the last month or so. Currently, the contractor is constructing Phase 2 of the beach restoration project. Beach access is through Golden Sands Beach Park as well as Treasure Shores Beach Park. Those parks are both now closed until April 30th. As of April 15th, approximately 137,500 cubic yards have been placed on the beach by the contractor, representing about 49% of the 280,000 yards required for Phase 2 construction. Just last week alone, from April 11th through the 15th, the contractor placed 12,500 yards. The total Phase 2 shoreline is about 14,000 feet. As of the 15th, approximately 6,000 feet of beach, or about 43% of the Phase 2 construction template has been completed. And that stretches basically from the Northern Windsor section down to Northern Orchid as far as Phase 2 construction complete. Last week, from April 11th to the 15th, the contractor actually completed about 2,000 feet of beach, and this is because the fill densities were a little bit less than previous sections. As far as the construction schedule, the contractor has 10 construction, or as of the 15th, had 10 construction days left, 8 through today. Last week's haul average represented about 2,500 cubic yards per day, or about 115 truckloads per day. Again, using those estimates, it's projected that the contractor can haul about 30,000 yards more, about 1,670 truckloads over the next 2 weeks. Therefore, the maximum sand that can be delivered is 162,500 yards of the 280,000 yards. Staff estimate still remains around 160,000 yards as far as what the contractor can place on the beach prior to May 1st. This slide, as presented last week, shows the completed sections of the beach project. You can see the green bar represents full template construction, again from Windsor south. The lower photo, lower left, represents the area that the contractor is projected to be able to complete over the next 2 weeks. We're currently working right in front of these seawalls today. The upper photo shows the area, 120,000 yards, that will not be completed this year, or this phase, and that stretches from the Seaview development down to south, down to Treasure Shores Park. In this slide, this shows the 100% completed Phase 1 project area. Last week we completed the northern 1,000 feet remaining, and this now stretches 100% complete project area from northern Windsor south to northern Johns Island. That represents approximately 5 miles of completed beach restoration for Sector 3. On March 29th, the contractor requested a time extension to complete the remaining sections of Phase 2 that will be unable to be completed prior to May 1st. With this information, we shared it with DEP to discuss the potential for a Sector 3 extension, if they would allow it, and also to request relief of the additional monitoring costs that may be required to phase or provide another phase of construction. Essentially, the meeting conclusions were yes, DEP would allow an additional phase of construction. The biological monitoring, which includes monitoring of the nearshore reef, as well as sea turtle monitoring, would only be required for 3 years for the sections or the phases that have already been completed. So no additional monitoring for the biological, which is where the most of the costs are. So that's really good news. For example, phase 1 was completed last summer, about 4 miles of beach. So 2013, which will be the 3rd annual biological monitoring, will not be necessary for subsequent years. So 4 miles of beach is a pretty good benefit or savings there. As for the physical monitoring, every time we phase the project, for example, this happened with phase 2, we had to extend the physical monitoring, which includes aerial photos as well as beach surveys to project the project performance. DEP specified and reiterated that our permit requires that we monitor year 1, 2, 3, and year 5. So with a phase 2 remainder, phase 3 extension, we would now have to monitor into 2017. So for the county to move forward with phase 2 remainder, we would need to obtain an additional notice to proceed for the sections that we did not complete from DEP. We'd also have to obtain an additional special use permit from the Archikara National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to the highest density sea turtle nesting, so that's why we would need another use permit. Also, we would have to, next December through February, we would have to conduct additional construction phase services, monitoring, inspection, review of payments, or application for payments, etc., from the contractor. And we'd also, as I previously mentioned, we'd have to perform an additional post-construction monitoring event and final report year 2017. A couple weeks ago, we brought Coastal Tech work order to the board, work order number 11 to the board. This work order represented the post-construction monitoring for phase 1, year 1, and post-construction monitoring immediately post-construction for phase 2. As directed by the board, we were asked to look at ways to combine and reduce monitoring costs of this work order. Now, with the elimination of extra biological monitoring requirements from DEP, we estimate at minimum, we're still analyzing some costs for sea turtle monitoring, for example, but at minimum, reductions to the hard bottom monitoring and so forth would represent about $69,000 of work order number 11, which was about $500,000 or a 13.5% reduction. And we plan to bring this to the board on the third work order number 11. And finally, next steps for phase 2 project, beginning end of the month into first week in May, we're going to conduct dune planting and also the site restoration. So we expect the beach parks to again open up first week of May. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Any questions of Mr. Gray? There being none, I guess we can move on to the next item, which is Utility Services Water Tank Maintenance Program, RFP number 2007057, Tank Addition. Anybody want to make a motion for this before Mr. Olson gets down?
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Wheeler, a second from Commissioner Davis. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. But Eric, don't go far. Because next up, we have presentation regarding the City of Vero Beach Utilities and Indian River Shores, which will be led by Mr. Olson.
Well, good morning. For the record, Eric Olson, Director of Utilities, Indian River County. Today, we've got somewhat of a unique discussion because it's really a two-part discussion inextricably linked together. The first of which is going to be a request to basically go back and present a proposal to Indian River Shores for water and sewer service on the 28th of this month. The other discussion linked to this is really a request to consider the possibility of going in and acquiring the City of Vero Beach utility system by basically paying off their perceived current debt load and acquiring it at this point in time. I think the best thing to do before we get into the process of the details is talk about a little bit of the history and then flash forward into today, because that gives you a perspective of exactly where we're going into the future. Back in the early 80s, the City of Vero Beach was virtually the only utility game in town. The Indian River County Utilities was a hodgepodge of small private package plants, water plants, sewer plants, primarily located to serve individual developments, both on the mainland and also on the barrier island itself. They did not actually have, until the early 80s, a regional wastewater or water plant. In 1983, the county began constructing its first water plant, followed thereafter by the construction of the wastewater plants, the West Wastewater Plant at 82nd Avenue and 8th, the central plant off of 49th and Gifford. The southern wastewater plant was acquired through purchase from the General Development Corporation in the Vero Highlands. But during those early 80s, again, it's important to recognize that the service was really, the utility was really the City of Vero Beach. In 1986, the City of Vero Beach entered into a franchise agreement with the town of Indian River Shores, and the purpose of that was really to define the service for water, sewer, and reuse, primarily water and sewer. It's important within the context of that agreement that it actually specifies the differentiation between who owns what at the culmination of this agreement. What it states in the agreement, at the culmination of this franchise agreement, which will be in 2016, the town of Indian River Shores will acquire a firm ownership of all of its pre-existing infrastructure. And without going into a lot of specific detail, it's virtually everything from Fred Turk Drive north. The City of Vero Beach inherits that infrastructure that basically would serve the portion of the City of Vero Beach south of that. In today's situation, the flash forwarding into today, I think it's important to be in a position to kind of look at the, if you will, a contrast of comparison of sizes. Keep in mind that Indian River County back in the early 80s virtually didn't exist. But for a period of about 15 or 20 years, we've been growing up and down, but on an average of about 2.3% per year. This has pretty much taken place during 2005, 2006. We saw a huge increase, obviously totally, out of context, which would be normally the growth projections. The City of Vero Beach is somewhat more restricted in their growth simply because of the fact that they're somewhat landlocked. If you look at the slide up here, what you're going to basically see is a combination of our information as we've gathered from the City of Vero Beach. And I've got to paraphrase this. We've done the best we can to acquire information from the City of Vero Beach. They are limited in their software to be able to give us customer information, perhaps to the detail that we would like. But I'm giving you information as we see it to the best of our understanding, and that's the key on this thing. I'll go ahead and catch you here. The total customer base for water service within the City of Vero Beach is about 12,000, more or less, because this is dated in 2009, so it's about 12,000. But one of the things that's important, look at the breakdown between the City of Vero Beach customer base. The City of Vero Beach, within the confines of the city limits, has about 7,400 customers, which represents water customers about 62%. Now that's metered customers. It does not necessarily represent revenue, because there's a difference on it. It's a basic difference between who uses the more water. And Indian River Shores, you'll notice, has a water customer base of about 1,912 customers, which represents about 16%. The South County Barrier Island, the moorings in that area represents a little bit larger perspective, about 2,650 customers, or roughly 22%. So what you really see, you begin to see that the makeup of the city of Vero Beach is really, for the most part, nearly 40% of the outlying without the city boundary itself. Indian River County, you can kind of get a sense of the size comparisons. Our customer base currently right now is about 43,725, give or take. Water customers, a little less on the sewer side. When you look at both water and sewer, you'll begin to see that there are areas where they still have septic tank systems. The real difference between Indian River County and the city is really primarily the regional ability to grow. That's really where everything is said and done with the county. We currently, at this point, see a very marginal growth for the next couple of years. No surprise, the housing market is pretty much at a standstill. Our projection based on University of Florida Beaver is probably at about 1.5% for another couple, 3 years. And then in the process, as we project forward, we're going to probably fall back into the 2.3% growth. Hold right there just for a second. I'll kind of catch it. It's important to look at this thing in terms of the future, saying to yourself, okay, as a growing customer base, what does that do to us in terms of our ability to kind of hold our rates pretty much the same? I've said this before a number of different times. Nearly 12 years ago, the county implemented its last rate study. The rate study was a good rate study. We haven't changed our rates, and more importantly, we have no vision of changing our rates in the foreseeable future. The large portion or reason behind that is the simple logistics of economies of scale. As you get a larger customer base, you basically divide that income into the amount of costs, and you begin to see I can weigh those costs over this larger customer base without having to necessarily raise rates. Now, unfortunately, when you look at the city situation, good or bad, and I make no judgment on it, again, they have a very limited growth base on this thing, so there is a little bit of a question as to ultimately what their rates will do. One of the questions, and this is very critically important to the discussion, either as it pertains to the city of Vero Beach as a acquisition of the utility itself, or simply our ability to serve the Barrier Island, both in the South Barrier Island or Indian River Shores. Consistently, I receive questions from a lot of different places. Does Indian River County have the capacity to serve the shores, the South Barrier Island, and the city of Vero Beach? That question sometimes is divided more specifically. What about those people that have paid impact fees? Aren't they included? What if they come back in? People that, for example, John Doe that has paid his impact fee, has bought a piece of the rock, if you will, from the county, has not yet built. Yes?
Just for the audience, you're talking here about water.
That's correct.
It might not be clear to the audience.
Well, it actually, in this particular case, it actually goes across both aspects. When you talk about capacity.
But the numbers change when you go from one to the other. I just want to make that clear.
And I'll focus on the specifics on it, but I want to talk about generalities because we continually get this question, do we have the capacity? What I want to basically be in a position to do is define that answer. If I have to say it again and again, it's very important to understand the distinction. Indian River County takes a very conservative perspective on what is our net capacity. Very simply, we take our current system demand. In this case, as is indicated up there, that's our water capacity. You take the total demand, that which we treat, going out the plant, going to the customers, that's a number. We then take the hypothetical total amount of people that have paid impact fees but yet not connected. We assign that value to that. We add that to the current demand that's going out the front door, or in the case of wastewater, that which is being treated. That represents a number. We then compare that number to the total capacity that the plant has. In this case, we're looking at a situation where this represents water. We take the total capacity, the physical capacity of our two plants, Indian River County has 2 water plants. The South Water Plant has a capacity of about 8.57 MGD. The North Water Plant has a physical capacity of approximately 17 MGD. Altogether, we have a capacity of about 24.7 physical capacity MGD. Now, there's a difference between permitted capacity, and sometimes that comes up, versus physical capacity. If you have the physical capacity, you can always adjust your consumptive use capacity, permitted capacity, based on demand needs demonstrated to St. John's Water Management District. In this particular case, related to water, you'll look at the numbers up there, and basically you take the total capacity of the system, 24.7 MGD. You then take a look at the sum total of 10.6 is our peak demand. We will take it a little bit more conservative. That's our peak demand. We add to that the concurrency demand, those people that have paid impact fees that have yet not connected. And then we deduct the 2. And we look at that and we basically say to ourselves, okay, we have a capacity of 12.2 MGD excess or net available capacity. And so in our case, this is basically our status. Now in a graphical format, you kind of get a sense, and it's pretty easy to get lost in the numbers there, but the bottom line is you'll see up in this is our current physical capacity. There are 2 lines down there. The yellow line represents the concurrency demand. The blue line represents the actual demand. The difference between the 2 represents the net available. So the bottom line relative to water, the county has 12.2 MGD of physical capacity available for whatever purpose in the future. Now, looking at this thing as we kind of go forward, basically, if we can find the little arrow here, this will give you a little bit more of a depiction again, looking at this thing on a pie chart basis. You see the 10.6 is what we actually treat, the 1.9 is the committed demand, and then the net over there on the right. The wastewater system is a little bit, it's the same system, no different like that. We have an overall capacity, I'm going to use the pie charts because it's a little bit easier. We have a total capacity of 12.85 MGD. That's our plant capacity. We have 3 regional plants. The Southern Regional Plant was built actually by General Development. Indian River County acquired it in the late 90s. We converted it over to a countywide system. We have the Central Plant at Gifford, and then we have the West Plant out on West 82nd Avenue and 8th Street. We have also some minor plants. We have North Plant up on 77th. We also have the Blue Cypress, and we've got some smaller systems, but they're minimal. Total capacity of 12.85 MGD. And again, same exercise as what we've done before. Our peak demand as we speak today is about 4.9, a little under 5 MGD. The committed but yet not connected capacity is 1.36, and you begin to see the difference of the delta between that. The net available capacity, that's the net available capacity, is 6.5 MGD. So that'll give you a sum total looking at between the 2. The thing that I'm going to now back up a little bit and talk about the timing on these things. Indian River Shores has until approximately October of this year to make a decision as to where they wish to be served by their future franchise provider. That could either be the City of Vero Beach, and I have to say the City of Vero Beach has provided a draft agreement to the Shores. The Shores has reviewed that. They've made some comments. I'm not aware that that draft agreement has gone back to the City Council for review, but basically it does a couple things. First of all, it requests, and I'm going to emphasize the fact that it requests the City of Vero Beach. The city has not, to my knowledge, reviewed it and approved this, so I don't know where it'll go. That they no longer charge a 10% surcharge to the town of Indian River Shores. In addition, the infrastructure that I talked to a little bit earlier, where that would revert back to the town of Indian River Shores, if the city or some other entity acquired the franchise in the future, that infrastructure would then revert to that entity, be it the city or the county. or at least in the city's proposal, it would revert to the city. So whenever staff began to look at what it would take to serve Indian River Shores, I think we can pretty much agree whether the discussion is related to water or whether it's related to wastewater. The county has net capacity to serve the town of Indian River Shores. Now, we have estimated this capacity within the shores, and we've had to estimate it because, again, data is somewhat difficult to really pin down. We assume that the customer base of 1,912 water and about 1,727 for sewer is about right. We asked for data related to their usage per capita. We got varying information databases from the city regarding that. I've heard data that ranged anywhere from as high as 15,000 to as low as 1,000, but the most common number seems to be about 6,000 gallons as an average across their customer base. So we took that customer base average and we then said, okay, 6,000 gallons per customer, what does that translate to in terms of water and sewer demand? Because that's what we deal with on a nuts and bolts basis. And it's a little less than a half an MGD. About 0.5 MGD is approximately what their demand is. Obviously, looking at our net capacity, that's a pretty easy jump. There's no problem with our ability to be able to serve that capacity-wise. The next step was to be in a position to be able to say, okay, what's it going to take to physically tie into Indian River Shores? Now, here became a little bit of an issue because it links back to that discussion of regionalization. Regionalization has huge benefits all the way around for a lot of different reasons. One of the proposals that we looked at, we had to assume that what if the city of Vero Beach basically said, look, if you, the county, wish to serve the shores, you got to go it alone. So on that basis, we then took a worst-case scenario. And I'm going to emphasize this because we looked at it as a worst-case scenario. We basically said, okay, if in fact the city did not participate, then we have to plan on constructing our own water lines. And we basically said, okay, we need to do two different things. In this particular graph, although it really talks about the water line, we actually planned on constructing a water line with two directional bores roughly to Fred Turk and tying into those lines that would default back to Indian River Shores. Simple process. We did it up on the Wabasso Causeway. It's not a difficult project. I've checked on permitting. It's not an issue with us being able to permit. Unfortunately, it's a significant project. It is, in fact. Now, to the north up at Baytree, Indian River County currently has connections. We can modify those connections. We can increase those connections. But to logically serve the town of Indian River Shores, you really need a redundant service, not only from the north, but also from the south. In order to do that, we basically said, okay, what would that cost be if, in fact, we went and we basically tied all this together? We came up with some options. We kept nagging at us the fact that, well, wait a minute, what if the city of Vero Beach were to look at this thing in a different perspective and said, well, we'd like to cooperate with you because rather than spending a lot of money for nothing, perhaps there's a better way to do it. One scenario is that the city of Vero Beach currently has an underwater crossing that serves their water roughly coming into Fred Turk. That defaults back to the city of Vero Beach at the end of the franchise agreement. That was constructed a number of years ago. It's a very valid water line that exists today. If hypothetically the city of Vero Beach were to say, okay, we don't have a significant need for that in the future if in fact you serve the town, let's sell it to you for some reasonable amount. I'll guarantee you that amount is a fraction of what it would cost to construct. We're estimating about $1.3 million. You'll see in a little bit later slide, it's a little bit more than that, but about $1.3 million per directional bore.
And we need two of those?
We would need two of those under this worst-case scenario. So if we had the ability to purchase, now keep in mind, what's the purpose of this underwater crossing as it exists today? It's serving the town of Indian River Shores. It loops back to the south into the city of Vero Beach, but it's really there primarily to serve Indian River Shores. If the county were to serve Indian River Shores, one could generate an argument that that line almost becomes obsolete. So there is a good argument to say, why not just have the city sell this to the county at some small portion of money. Now we begin to see our costs, and I'll go through these costs here in a little bit, begin to drop dramatically. This gives you a little bit of a perspective on what the differences in costs are. When we went through, and I've got to emphasize that this is a level of detail that our planning staff and engineering staff looked at based on project costs that we've experienced. We're not talking about things that we don't typically do in our normal routine of construction. We've done directional bores. We have prices on directional bores. We do typical projects. So we didn't really extrapolate beyond something that we didn't have some reasonable knowledge on. But the worst case scenario, let's start at the top. Worst case scenario, the city does not cooperate, does not allow us to purchase the water line. On that basis, we end up tying up lines at the north by Bay Tree. We do the directional bores, tying at Fred Turk, and we're looking at a rough approximate cost of about $6.4 million. We rounded up later to 6.5 just for rule of thumb purposes. If hypothetically the city of Vero Beach were to come back in and say, well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. We'll sell you that underwater crossing that currently exists that we own, because we wouldn't have a purpose for it. On the basis of that, you begin to see the cost begin to drop dramatically. Now there's another scenario. As we get further down into this thing, it's possible we don't have to construct any directional bores. If the city of Vero Beach were to come back and say, you know, I'll tell you what, we have no purpose for the water line, we'll sell you the water line. We would in turn also then begin to utilize their existing sewer lines and basically that exist currently within the city of Vero Beach and basically siphon off the equivalent amount of usage to the shores, and that capacity, you know, just make minor adjustments, and those costs drop to about $2.3 million. And we're very conservative on these costs. You're going to hear me throughout this conversation. We've always tried to be extremely conservative. I didn't want to be in a position to be able to say, wait a minute, but you didn't accurately project things.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, going back to that last slide,
yeah.
Whenever you put the prices in there, there's a variable on the option 1 and 2, and that is the purchase from the city of Vero Beach. So that somehow, even though we don't know what that number is, there ought to be something plus.
We threw in a value. We just put a hypothetical value, estimating around $400,000.
So that's baked into those two figures?
It's built into that figure. We've assumed that figure to be the case. Right. And here's what we did. We took a look at this thing. Now, obviously, what's in the value is in the eye of the person that owns it, and, you know, we've seen that. But if you look at the original cost when this thing was constructed, and if you assume some reasonable depreciation value, if you paid $300,000 or $400,000 for that line, that's a pretty significant windfall. That's, frankly, that's a reasonable price. The other costs are, again, as on number 1, are pretty much as we indicated like that. So basically, when everything is said and done, you kind of get a sense of the comparatives on this. In the back of your mind, you begin to see also the beginnings of asking yourself, where does regionalization fit into this picture? You begin to see common pipes, utilization, having to not go through a process of construction redundancy. So regionalization begins to sort of ring a bell out of this process. Now, relative to the town of Indian River Shores, on April 28th, we have been asked to basically present a proposal to the town in terms of what would be our franchise proposal. Let me step into this thing by a couple different perspectives. Again, Indian River County has not raised its rates since 1999. There's no immediate perspective to raise rates in Indian River County. We're looking at this thing as a pretty stable system. I'm not going to second guess and project with the cities. You've seen presentations on that, but I'm not going to go in and project the city's perspective on that. That pretty much speaks for itself. In order to look at this thing, we analyze this in terms of saying, okay, worst case scenario, let's go through each of the 3 options. What if we wanted to ask ourselves, what's the impact of that $6.5 million? And you see we've rounded up. We've tried to maintain a little conservative perspective. we tried to estimate the income or revenue from the shores. And again, the difficulty we run into is getting reliable data from the city, and it's, as I understand, it's hard from their software system to give us good, solid data. What I did is I basically assumed, I said, okay, if it's 6,000 gallons per customer, and I took 1,912 water customers and 1,727 sewer customers, I said, all right, let's just plug our rates into it. What would it end up being at the end of the year? And you can see a number of about $1.375 million is what the gross revenues that I calculate. Now, there are a lot of people that would tell you, and I might not disagree with them, that that number might be very conservative. Why do I say that? The original September 14th draft asset purchase agreement that was sent to the city of Vero Beach basically outlined that that original perspective, now this has changed, that is not in today's agreement, that they would in essence purchase the town's infrastructure through basically avoiding the 10% surcharge, which was estimated to be in that particular agreement of about $306,000 per year. Now, whether that's a valid number or not, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. If you use that number and then back in to say, well, okay, if that's 10%, where did the gross revenues have to be something significantly 90% of that, which means my estimate of 1.375 might be low, and I'd be the first to tell you that that number, in fact, might be low. I took another look at things this morning. I looked at the city's budget and took a look at it in terms of saying, okay, metered revenues. And I basically estimated the meter revenues, and I said to myself, okay, if the shores represent 16% of the customer base for the city of Vero Beach, but they're a higher usage per capita than normal residents within the city, I said to myself, well, okay, how close to that 1.375 is that? So I estimated 20% of perhaps $10 million for metered sales. It might be slightly less than that. You're probably closer to $2 million for gross revenues for water and sewer only. Now, I'm not including reuse, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So my number of 1.375 could be argued that it is too conservative, but it is what it is. It's up there. The next thing was I tried to say to myself, okay, what would the cost of service be if we're going to provide 0.5 MGD of water and 0.5 MGD of sewer, and that's actually averaged up. I went back to the original rate study. The original rate study that is valid today, and I looked at the volumetric charge base that went into play that created our rate study, and I said, okay, let me assign those values for water, $2.20 for water, $2.86 for sewer, plug it into the total amount used by both water and sewer, and I came up with an estimate slightly less than $700,000. Now, a lot of people would argue, probably myself included, that that is unrealistically high. That captures every cost that was generated in the original rate study in 1999. It probably is a little overzealous. I've actually met with staff. We've taken a look, and I'm talking about our water and sewer management team. We looked at it in terms of projecting what do we really think the incremental cost to serve that 500,000 gallons for water and 500,000 gallons for wastewater. Consistently, we saw numbers much less than the $700,000. Even if we added 4 additional staff to the process, we couldn't get 700,000. But it's my obligation, and working with Jason on this, saying that we want to give you worst case scenario. So using $6.5 million as the estimated cost, if we wanted to recover that cost, we just said, okay, using those conservative revenue and expenditure numbers, it looked like we would have a deficit of about $110,000 if we plugged in a 4.5% interest rate if you were to borrow the money for 12 years. And it gives you a 7.9% surcharge, if that's what was decided on. Now, go to option number 2 and option number 3. What do you see on that? As the cost to provide the service goes down, even under those worst case scenarios of projections for revenues and expenses, There's no necessity for surcharge on the basis of that. So I will say that when I ran through the numbers this morning, I wouldn't post them, but if the numbers that I've run through this morning by showing a more liberal revenue and expense, less on the expenses, you could generate an argument that the 8% is really not required, but it is for today's discussion. So the proposal that's on the table is on the basis of assuming worst-case scenario, and this is a worst case. If you want to recover the full cost of the $6.5 million, staff would recommend that you put in the 8% surcharge for 12 years on the basis of that. You in turn could come back and say, well, that may be a little bit too conservative. It may not be realistic in that process, and you'd be valid in that statement. So the proposal that staff would put on the table related to Indian River Shores would be that the county would provide service for the next 30 years, much as with the presentation to the city. The county would acquire the town's infrastructure as defined in the current franchise agreement. We would construct in one of those three options, but let's assume the worst case scenario. We would construct the necessary lines and they would become customers of the county. Now, after 12 years, there is no requirement of franchise surcharge or anything to that effect. So you're basically just like any other county system, like the customer. So that's what's on the table today. Now, having said that, I have a meeting on the 28th that was requested on the part of the town. So my recommendation is today you direct staff in terms of what would be acceptable to present a proposal relative to the town. Before you do this, let me go into the next aspect of things. I want to talk about reuse. The biggest issue that I've heard relative to the town of Indian River Shores is reuse, reuse, and reuse. This is a very critical need for the town of Indian River Shores. They've said it repeatedly. It doesn't matter who's serving them, whatever the case is. Unfortunately, there's a paradox. The city of Vero Beach cannot serve the capacity requested by the shores. Unfortunately, the county doesn't have the direct infrastructure to go into the shores to feed from the south, although we will feed from the north here within about 6 months. So what is really the final, when everything is said and done, the service of reuse is you cannot escape the fact that it's got to be a combination of both. You cannot escape the production requirement generated by the city of Vero Beach would have to still maintain itself, whether it's owned by the county or whether it's still owned by the city. That production volume that's currently going to the southern portion of Indian River Shores would still be there. We would then supplement that. We, the county, I've actually offered to the city of Vero Beach, if they would like, we can supplement their reuse volume by 1 million gallons a day if they want, very simply. We can attach our lines to their lines, and it's a very simple process. We have currently construction projects in place to serve upwards into the Barrier Island and actually tie into Johns Island East. So, again, when everything is said and done, to serve the needs, it's a combined process. So that's a negotiation situation that will take place at a different day. But it tells you this concept of merging or growing together with the city and the county has some extensive benefits, even to the extent of when you talk about something as simple as reuse. You begin to see, well, wait a minute. If we're going to have to use the two parties anyway, why not merge the systems into one in such a way that we can basically provide the total amount requested by the service, clients such as Indian River Shores. So, moving to today, what we have done, we within Indian River County staff, we've looked at are there benefits associated with acquiring the City of Vero Beach utility system. And let me just kind of give you a little bit of perspective as to why that's a true statement. First of all, there is a question, do you need that the wastewater plant on the 17th Street Bridge there? The county already has capacity. If that were basically merged into the county system, the requirement or necessity for that wastewater plant would go away. That's the long and the short of it, because the capacity now becomes merged with the county's capacity. There's been discussions in earlier commission meetings regarding the numbers of personnel. On a personnel basis to treatment basis, Indian River County staff is pretty lean and mean. I mean, that's, and let me give you an idea how we know that's a very true statement. Everybody knows there's companies that come out from the woodwork every once in a while and say, well, look, we want to run your system. We're going to give you an offer to run your system. We have got a process that'll save your day. We've actually had a proposal from a very large company several years ago that came to Indian River County and says, we want to run your system. We want to come inspect your system, and we want to give you an offer to run your system. So we showed them around, and they looked at our budget, and they looked at our plant, and they, at the end of the day, they shook our hands and said, well, I'm sorry, we can't compete. So they left. Never heard from them since. So in our particular case, the question is, how many do you need of what to serve the generalized system out there? And that's a real question, because when everything is said and done, it goes back to this issue. Why in the world are we having to theoretically put in redundant lines to serve the town of Indian River Shores, when in fact, in reality, we could utilize existing lines? Now, the city of Vero Beach will tell you there's a dilemma with the water system. The city of Vero Beach actually has a dual water system. It's actually a lime softening water plant. It's a very competent water plant. Many places in the country use them. It was put in decades ago. It uses water from shallow wells. Because of the fact that it uses water from shallow wells, and because of the nature of the plant itself, they have to project against the possibility of trihalomethane formation. It's a chemical that may potentially be considered to be a carcinogenic chemical process. So to avoid that, they use something called chloramines. It's a mixture of chlorine and ammonia. It's different from what we do. We use chlorine. That's all we do. If the lime softening plant were mothballed, and I'm just throwing it on the table, if that lime softening plant was mothballed, now they also have a small little RO plant. It should be used. If the county took it over, we would use it. But if the lime softening plant were mothballed, which is the lion's share of their water system, the necessity for chloramines goes away. So automatically our water is the same as their water. The common pipes could be utilized. Again, you're backing out of this requirement of putting in extra lines to serve who and what and for whatever. The end of the story comes down to the economies of scale, and I've said this before. Regardless as to whatever, the reality is that if that hardware store goes out and buys 15 crescent wrenches, that's one price. If you have Home Depot go out and buy a train load of crescent wrenches, that's another price. Indian River County, that's kind of where we're at in the process of things. We have, it's just the economies of scale, and as we grow, that's kind of the benefit. So when everything is said and done, to bring this thing to the second part of this discussion, staff is recommending that we present a proposal to the city of Vero Beach. You all have a meeting with the city of Vero Beach on the 29th of the month, which is kind of ironic because on the 28th, the day before, I'm to meet with Indian River Shores and present a proposal to them. Whatever that proposal is that you direct us to submit, that's what I'll submit. The next following day, you all are going to have discussions with the city regarding merging, looking down the future on this thing. So what I'm recommending is a similar discussion that you've heard from Glenn Heron and also Dr. Faraday. Citizens that have basically done an independent view on it, and frankly it made sense, and we agreed. It's a discussion that we've looked at and makes sense to us. What if we just simply acquire their debt service, which is about $24 million? In essence, we're going to buy their system for $24 million. That's a point to start with. What I'm recommending is that the county commission propose to the city of Vero Beach that we would acquire the city's infrastructure, plant and infrastructure, with that process in the acquisition, very similar to what we did with Sebastian. We did a very similar situation with them. We acquired that debt. We bought it from the city of the city of Sebastian, who had previously bought it from General Development. Worked out great. So two proposals today. The first proposal is that staff present to Indian River Shores that we serve them for the next 30 years as their franchise provider for water and sewer. Is being negotiated with the City of Vero Beach in such a way that we work out the details to provide the total volume that they require. The second request is that the County Commission basically provide a direction in such a way that we submit to the city a proposal to purchase their infrastructure for $24 million, give or take, and it varies a little bit depending on the information base that we're getting from the city. Now, who wins out of this? It's our belief that everybody wins. This is not a case of one side win, one side losing out of this process. Every time the City of Vero Beach buys into a large project, every time they do this, they just recently put in a deep well injection system. They put in a large 24-inch line to basically recover wet weather reuse from their wastewater plant over to their water plant for the deep well injection. They spent quite a bit of money and they borrowed that money. And we've said that before. When you borrow the money, you've in essence put a mortgage on your house. And that's exactly, that mortgage won't go away if it's a 20-year mortgage or it's a 30-year mortgage. So by combining strengths, and this is really the best way to say it, by combining strengths with the City of Vero Beach and the county acquiring this system, the typical customer would be less likely to see rate increases, would be less likely to see the necessity of these swings in prediction as to whether our capacity will be here or not, predictively looking at it. So when everything is said and done, that is the request that I bring, I as staff, and I'll turn it over to you.
Eric, I just want to make it clear, when you talk about the city purchase, what rates would the city residents then get?
We've looked at this thing, and they would look at county rates.
Okay. With that, I would like to begin the discussion if I could. I don't see any reason, based on everything you've done, to have a proposal which would offer the City of Vero Beach county rates, but the town of Indian River Shores something different. And when I go and look at the numbers you presented, and, if you took a look at it as some sort of risk, what if we're at this point, what our risk is going forward, you can look at it a couple of ways. One is to just say the blended cost of the three options you gave, which is somewhere about $4.1 million. And if that were the case, then no adjustment to the rates would be necessary.
Correct.
And then if you just look at it in terms of the philosophy behind this, the philosophy behind giving or taking over the City of Vero Beach's system, but giving them county rates is, I believe, not necessarily financially based. I mean, financially, we've shown we can do it at no cost to the county customer. But the philosophy in there is, what's the best way to move forward for all the citizens of Indian River County? And I think that philosophy, which is good for the City of Vero Beach, is also good for the town of Indian River Shores. So again, philosophically, I can't see a reason for the two different ways. So as an alternative to yours, I'd like to propose that we go forward basically with all the caveats that you've rightfully proposed, especially in terms of the information we don't have, which is still puts us on weak ground in some areas, but basically go forward to say that to the shores, listen, we'd be happy to provide you with the water and sewer services that you now get, but you'll become county customers, but at county rates. And City of Vero Beach will take over your assets and liabilities and give you county rates. I think that is the cleanest, simplest, and politically most palatable way to go forward. And based on the time I've spent with you and your department and with Mr. Herron and Mr. Faraday and others trying to go through this, that's where I keep on coming down. Initially, I'd like to say that there's no doubt about it that if you just had a merger and when looking at it on a financial basis, then there'd be a benefit to the county customer that you could give the county customer in terms of lower rates, but you'd have to charge higher rates to the others. So again, if it were just financially done, I'd get a different outcome. But at the end of the day, looking at what is both politically doable, but also best for the county as a whole, I believe a unified rate structure for everybody is the way to go. That's.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I guess I agree with you philosophically that practicality, I don't see it happening with the way the city has been taking shots at our utility system and the pushback from staff. I don't see the city coming to the table under your unified concept under the conditions now. What I would suggest is Eric basically present the three options to the town of Indian River Shores. And the worst case option obviously would be option one. And what I would suggest though is that we would, Eric, I assume that your capital estimates on option one, the 6.5 million, is that a pretty hard number that we can?
It's as good as we could do without actually going and doing a project design, surveying and the whole 9 yards like that. It's an aerial estimate. If you
what I would present to the town is option one, okay, here's your worst case scenario. And what we'll do is if you hook up and go with the county, after 2 years, we'll relook at the service to the town. Because one, if your revenues are grossly underestimated, that may eliminate the need for the surcharge. Or we could shorten the time period of the surcharge and pay the loan off quicker. So I would suggest that after 2 years of use, we have some actual usage records. We've got 2 years, and then we'll know what our actual cost was. We'll know what the actual revenue is. And then we can come back to the town and say, listen, this is the worst case, but if we're too conservative, we can make it a better deal going forward. And if it is $2 million in revenue, then you can say, okay, we'll give you the county rates and we can eliminate the surcharge completely because the revenue is much higher. So I would propose to them option one as their worst case scenario. After 2 years, we'll reevaluate with the idea that we should be able to make it even better. And then I think, it really comes down to what the town does, okay? If the town votes to go with the city of Vero Beach, then I think it's even more unlikely the city would want to then look at regionalization. I think if the town makes a decision to go with our proposal, and if we start moving forward with plans to serve the South Barrier Island, then I think the city has to come to the table and say, you know what? We can't afford to lose 40% of our revenue base. We will come and talk regionalization. And so I think we need to move forward with the presentation to the town. And if they take our proposal, then I think we can then say, okay, then option 2 and 3 look even better, likely to happen. But I don't see 2 or 3 likely to happen as of today, how things stand.
Well, one thing, and Alan perhaps could help out on this thing, but my understanding is that even if a decision is made on the part of the town on the 28th, let's say hypothetically, whatever the final presentation to the town actually is, and they come back and they say, well, we want to ink in this, final contract. My understanding is the actual turning on of the valve can't take place until 2016, until the completion of the franchise itself. Is that correct?
That's correct, without cooperation of the city.
Right. So we're back to square one again regarding how this is perceived, because if the city basically says we're not going to cooperate until 2016, you've got a little bit of time before you're actually, when everything is said and done. It may be that because of the circumstances, it could be 2 or 3 years before everything gets constructed, although I would recommend we do it sooner than later because of the economy with construction costs. But, so just a point to consider in that.
Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah. Peter, when you say the city has been taking shots at the utilities, our utilities, I'm not aware of that. I have watched some of the city council meetings where 1 or 2 of the city council people may have taken shots, but it seems like the other 2 or 3 have not. If they did, I've missed it. And the city is the city council. It's not the city staff. It's not 2 members of the council or the mayor or vice mayor, whoever. So I don't know. I'm kind of an optimist, I think, at this point, thinking that if it's indicated to the current city council that this is to benefit the entire city of Vero Beach, not just the county also, but the entire city of Vero Beach, I think there's some, we'll find out on the 29th, I guess, but I think there's room for movement to do this because it not only will benefit South Beach and the shores that they choose to go, but it would be beneficial to the city. So, and what I'm hearing, and I catch some of the meetings and watch them on television, and I've found probably 2 to 3 members being supportive of this and have looked at numbers and so on and so forth. So I don't know where it's going, but I'm going to be optimistic until, I get a 3-person vote over it.
Right, I just also think that their utility advisory committee and their finance advisory committee had talked about this, and they were less than enthusiastic about the regionalization, so.
I saw that meeting where they, there seems to be some protectionism, I guess, and understandable.
Smoot Hawley?
Oh, no.
Bob? Sorry. There have been discussions. On occasion, there are questions regarding the county's real financial status, and let me just crow a little bit about the county's financial status just for a second. We all know 2 years ago, the county received, utility department, a AAA bond rating from our Fitch rating service. In our worst of conditions, Fitch came back again a couple of weeks ago. I mean, let's face it, we're at the bottom of the barrel relative to what the economy should or should not look like. In their own words to us, they've had to give some pretty depressing messages to utilities across the state and across the area. Indian River County, into the worst of conditions, received a AAA rating. So, you can say what you want to say, but it's a AAA rating. So,
I'd like to follow up on something, if I could, with Eric right now, and it deals with something that both you and Gary have said about the nefarious nabobs of negativism out there, which I'm not going to say is the city council, but there are some out there who have said some bad things about us financially. But in correspondence with the city of Vero Beach, on December 7th, 2010, and on April 8th, 2011, I wrote to the mayor and to Councilmember Turner and specifically asked them if they had any questions about the county system. And I have not received any questions from them, and I was wondering if you had received any questions from them about either our capacity or our financial ability.
No.
Jason, have you heard any questions from the... Okay, I just want to say then, I would say, or certainly hope then, that given that we've offered a number of times to answer any questions, and indeed still responding to these negative comments that I've heard, but not attributing to anybody, back on March 28th, Jason Brown, Joseph Baird, myself, and Councilmember Turner met with Ross Cotherman, who's both our auditor and the auditor from the city of Vero Beach. And every one of these nefarious negative statements that I heard about, I repeated to our auditor and said basically, okay, we've heard about $11 million loss. Could you point it out to me on the CAFR? And he goes, well, no, that's not accurate. And just went down the line. Every negative statements I've heard and asked if that was accurate, and each time he said no. And then he basically said that, the county system is in very good financial shape. And then we offered Councilmember Turner the opportunity to ask any question that she wanted based on our CAFRs or numbers. And she'd asked a couple of questions, and my understanding is she went away satisfied. So I'm saying all this and being a little long here because I'd like us to go into the meeting on April 29th without having to revisit a lot of these negative statements and to actually just be able to talk about the nuts and bolts of regionalization and whether, as a matter of policy, if this is something the city of Vero Beach would like to pursue, the same way we're deciding today as a matter of policy if it's something we wish to pursue. So,
I think that you have to approach this that the winner is a customer here. It's the city of, I live in the city of Vero Beach, but the winner is the customer. That's the water and sewer customer who would be the winner, because if you look at this, there's 2 or 3 things. One is they had a rate study done that said they needed a rate increase, which they've postponed. And it's inevitable that they're going to need one, and especially since their rating is a BBB. And if you have a rate consultant do a rate study and he says you need a rate increase and you don't, that's usually considered a negative thing by the rating agencies, so their rating would get worse. So I think everyone needs to look at this. The winners, all the residents and the customers in the city of Vero Beach. I think the council looks at it that way. They'll see that because we're very strong, and we won't need a rate increase, especially in the area of 40%, or we haven't had to postpone capital in our system. So,
okay, well, anyway, I hope we basically address those questions to everybody's satisfaction. And again, I think that Joe's right. The winner is the customer, and the winner is the county, because it takes a lot of risk out of everything. And if we, I'm not going to say that. Commissioner Davis.
Yes. It may, on the 29th, I don't know what it would cost us, but it may be beneficial to actually have our auditor there if any of those questions were to come up.
And I'm happy to, Joe, do you think you could ask Mr. Kaufman if he'd be available at the time for that meeting? It is after April 15th, so.
Yeah.
And he's an auditor, so they don't, so would you be able to get? Okay. Any other?
Well, I wasn't done.
Oh, sorry.
And Eric, I was following you pretty good until you started talking about the reuse, and I do understand the significance of the reuse for Indian River Shores with the affordability for irrigation purposes. From what I gather that you're saying is the city of Vero Beach already has the line, they just can't supply enough water through that line to be able to meet what they would like to have. Therefore, I'm assuming that they are actually using either regular artesian wells or potable water for irrigation.
That's correct. They're supplementing, they're having to supplement the reuse.
With?
I've heard two different stories. I've heard that they supplement it on occasion with potable water, but I've also heard that they supplement it from their well system.
Artesian well, okay.
So I've heard both. I couldn't tell you exactly.
All right. With that being such an important part of, if it is truly, as you've said, and I have no reason to not agree with you, how come we didn't put more of a plan in place that was independent only of or dependent only on Indian River County versus anything with reuse?
Well, it'll work either way. The beauty of reuse is that it can operate independent of whatever ultimately we end up with a merger system or not. For example, we made a proposal. We have lines on 49th Street, and we basically said we can simply just extend those lines to the water plant over there by the airport, which is where the basis of their reuse lines.
No, I'm sorry. You're missing my point. Why are we presenting something with reuse that assumes that the city of Vero Beach would play ball with the regionalization? Let's just, why don't we put forth an Indian River County reuse plan and assume option one's going to happen, and it didn't go into detail enough, in my opinion, for us to be able to say this is how we're going to give you all the reuse you need with option one.
I wouldn't recommend that, and let me tell you why I wouldn't recommend it. Because the infrastructure that's in existence today to serve the shores with their reuse, their reuse lines that come up from the city, there's a tank there on Fred Turk that basically supplements the reuse. They're structured with their infrastructure to appropriately serve the southern end of the shores like that. For us to come up with a redundant aspect to that is just cost prohibitive. However, there is the ability for us to sell. Let's say that the city remains independent. They could, in fact, purchase at a bargain comparative rates. I'm going to give you some comparative rates. I don't have them off the top of my head. Indian River County charges 60 cents a 1,000 gallons for reuse. When contracts expire and you go into the new contract with the city, I've heard 80 to 85 cents for non-pressurized for reuse for the city to $1.80 for pressurized. So they could purchase from the county. It's an easy process of everybody wins out of that. They get a little bit of money out of it. We get some money out of it. That's if the city doesn't basically merge with the county. If the county were to absorb the city, use the same infrastructure.
No, and I follow that.
It's a function of not having.
I think what you end up is if the county was going to supply it all, they'd have to have large capital costs to build up the amount of reuse. And then we'd be taking away the city's customers, which is a source of about $1 million in revenue to them, and their alternative then, if we took away that revenue stream, would be to push it down the deep well. Just inject it in the deep well.
It's an advantage.
It doesn't help anybody. I mean, that's just bad government on both sides.
No, I follow what you're saying. And you answered my question that basically the city of Indian River Shores, regardless of how this turns out, would be better off in the event that we pushed our reuse through the city's lines, even if they remained as city.
Whichever way, they're the winners.
It's better.
They're ahead of the game because they get a much greater supply.
I understand now.
Just one caveat to that, though. I think the current franchise agreement with the city and the town is only for water and wastewater. So we could come in and provide reuse to, say, the north half of the town.
That's exactly correct, and our intent is to do that.
Right, okay. And then my understanding is the city proposal to the town is for water, wastewater, and reuse. So if the town does go with the city of Vero Beach, that would then exclude us from providing reuse because the new franchise would include reuse. Is that?
It could. I haven't seen the new franchise to that detail. Keep in mind that I'm not even sure that it's been in front of the the city commission over there. But it currently does not preclude us from serving them, but the new one may, depending as to how it's worded.
That's my
Yeah, I would venture to say if it's that important to the shores, that probably would be objectionable.
They would be wise to avoid that from being in there.
They're savvy, they understand
It's not to their advantage.
Yeah. Then, I guess, and Eric, one thing that I really, you're looking at it from the business side of it, and I respect that, and I guess really with in the event that you put forth option one, I think, and if I were as a council member of Indian River Shores, I would want to see it not to exceed that figure that you have put forth. Commissioner Bryan talked about a 2-year review as far as lowering it, and I don't know whether that would be something that would concern me as a city council member, that, if we're going to come back and revisit a rate, I would like to see it do nothing but go down and definitely not go up after I've made that decision long-term for the constituents of my city.
And that's what I meant, Commissioner Davis, that this would be presented as your worst-case scenario.
Yeah.
And that after the 2 years, we would relook at it with the intent of making it better, not worse for them.
Yeah.
Eric, could you put up or Jason or Eric, that sheet that shows the costs with the options 1, 2, and 3, and the... So I'm going to make go back one more, I think it is. Right there. I just want to point out again, with the option 1, the amount we're talking about with the estimated surcharge is $109,000, and that's with a lot of conservatism built in. So I'm just want to make one more pitch. From a negotiating standpoint, if our philosophy with the city of Vero Beach is county rates, I still don't understand why we don't approach the town of Indian River Shores with that same philosophy of county rates.
I agree.
And so for $109,000, when there's all sorts of conservatism built in, why bother? Let's just say, listen.
Can we?
Let's go county rates.
I agree with you. My question is can we?
Yeah, we can.
We're just doing the business approach here. We're just showing this is what they cost us. That's all we did, show business approach to it. It cost us $109,000 more, and that's all we did here. You can do whatever. I think the commission can do whatever they feel.
Can we make it a zero?
They can do whatever. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. I think, and Al will have to speak if I'm legally wrong. But one of the things we have to be careful is if they we'd want them to. And I didn't pick up on this until right now, and I feel kind of embarrassed that we have to show somehow that we got something because they're taking capacity in our plant. So if they gave us the lines, we could say, we can say that's how they gave us that, and we're using that towards the credit for capacity.
And you're absolutely right. That's our assumption, is in the similar vein as what was presented, as I understood it to the city, we would absorb and receive their infrastructure. It's kind of a quid pro quo type.
And do we need a motion to make the option 1 surcharge 0%?
I need something official.
So moved.
We have a motion from Commissioner Davis and a second from Commissioner Fletcher, and the motion is to basically go to the town of Indian River Shores and propose that we provide them the water and wastewater services with some caveats.
Yeah.
It's all at county rates.
At county rates with 0 surcharge.
We have the motion from Commissioner Davis, the second from Commissioner Fletcher. We have some people in the audience who may want to speak. Mr. Johnson?
And if I could, there's one thing to also,
go ahead,
that I think, and all the numbers look good. The one thing, though, that I think really didn't get mentioned in this entire process that I think is just as significant and has been the reoccurring theme of all these utility issues has been the fact that the town of Indian River Shores would have the opportunity to vote in or out of office those individuals that can adjust their rates.
Yeah.
And I think that as a city council, as a constituent of a city, if I were to live in one, I think that's extremely important for them to consider for the next 30 years.
And that's an issue that South Bear Island is going to see also.
That's exactly where I'm coming from with that issue, and that's what that should be in here somewhere, in my opinion. They probably already know it, I'm sure, but...
Commissioner Wheeler.
Just a question, Eric. If we go in with under the current motion, is that in any way going to have a negative impact on our current customer base?
No.
No possibility of that?
No.
Okay.
It's so negligible it wouldn't affect us whatsoever.
We could buy a ring.
the 109,000 would have to come from somewhere, Eric. Where would it come from?
Well, we've got a $40 million budget. We've got a $40 million budget. I hate to say that there's flexibility within the process. Somewhere in the process, we would pick it up in our, just in our R&R, whatever the case would be, 471 revenue monies, but,
Mr. Chairman.
it's a small number.
I bet you it's going to come from the figures being underestimate on revenue, overestimate on...
Well, I can tell you, based on our discussions...
That was when I first spoke, that I thought after 2 years, we'd look at it, and we could very well offer county rates, but I don't think it's a good business decision to make that commitment now until we see what the hard costs are.
I'd like to make it now.
We could also guarantee them a formula.
Motion, second. Mr. Johnson would like to say something. Name and address the record, please.
Bob Johnson, Corwin Subdivision. We're really fortunate to have a guy like Eric to be on top of the situation and to provide the background. But I haven't heard any presentation. It's fortunate that the people at, I guess, the moorings and the Indian River shores are going to have this great benefit of equal rates to the county. But I haven't heard if there's any presentations going to be made to the citizens of the county on this presentation and what's come about. I mean, I know you have been pretty much briefed today on what's going to happen. And I know the Vero Beach residents have pretty much been up to date on what's happening. But I haven't heard what is in the future for the rest of us that are on county water and what we have planned for the future. I myself would enjoy a rate reduction, not just a guarantee to keep the same reduction. It seems like we're maybe jeopardizing our AAA rating in exchange for a lower double B rating or what have you. So I would look for, as a customer that's not impacted, but would want to protect my potential liability in this situation, especially due to the county. I would look for a guarantee from Eric that my rates won't go up because 5 years from now, the decisions we're making, some unknowns because of the statistics that are being provided. What are our guarantees that the liability of the rates won't go up because we're expanding the system? We were anticipating being provided, getting off, say, our septic tanks. I mean, I'm glad we're expanding, but is there anything in the future that's? So I don't know. I'd like to hear. I don't know what the rush is. I mean, we got 2016 as the final date. So I'd just like to hear a little more discussion on it.
Well, I'd like to respond to that in a number of ways. Fine. The last thing first. What's the rush? Well, it's not that there's a rush, but the town of Indian River Shores is up against a date by which they have to respond to the City of Vero Beach on whether or not they're going to renew their franchise agreement, and that's coming up in the next few months. And the town of Indian River Shores has made it very clear to us on a number of occasions that they would like us to make a proposal, so it's not a rush. I'd like to go back a little bit in terms of county participation. I sort of began this process over 2 years ago when I asked the utility department to make a presentation publicly in this room about the opportunities that our system bring the community, and since then Mr. Olson and his staff have made 2 or 3 public presentations to this. On the idea of cost, Eric has done tremendous work to basically ensure that this is not going to cost the county taxpayers anything, and Glenn Herron, who came in and was very skeptical when he first came into the county offices. He had done a lot of his work independently and worked with county staff to look for flaws in the county numbers, and having spent a lot of time with that, he was fairly satisfied that that it worked. So there are no guarantees about things, but I think that the Utilities Department, with help from Mr. Herron, has done tremendous work to make sure that we're on the right path, that the numbers that we're using to determine whether or not this is going to cost the taxpayers anything are the best numbers available. And again, the idea is not to pit county against municipality. In my view, the idea is to use this as an opportunity to make a better, stronger Indian River County. And yes, there are some risks involved, but I believe the benefits of a unified system so greatly outweigh the risks that speaking for myself, I'm comfortable going forward. Eric, if you'd like to add anything.
No, I agree. And I think one of the things that we've done, kind of go to Mr. Johnson's questions, we've looked at this thing and basically said, okay, how do we do this in such a way that it does not create a cost on the county customer? And one of the things that's been fairly consistent with the county historically has been, as the county grows through the economies of scale process, when we acquired Sebastian, the same principle began to come true in that sense, that a larger customer base begins to divide those costs over a larger base, and then as a result, we haven't changed our rates. So, I agree, there's no crystal ball that basically has a guarantee to things, but there's a higher probability. And what we've done is we've actually gone through the financial aspects and looked at this thing and said, okay, how do we put in the greatest degree of certainty within the parameters that we can know today, that looking into the future, this isn't going to be a problem.
Anyone else from the audience care to speak? Jason, you...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to bring up something. This analysis was all performed on the basis of the utility as a freestanding issue financially. And like when we took over the City of Sebastian utility, that agreement with Sebastian, that franchise agreement with Sebastian, has a rate equalization charge of 6%. That would be notwithstanding what we're proposing there. So when it was mentioned that would be county rates, we just may need to get clarification on that if the 6% franchise equalization charge would be applied as well here.
We would have to probably do that. We do it with Sebastian, or we don't want to be treating one municipality different from another.
Okay.
And then we charge also, it's an equalization charge, and then we also charge our own customers 6%, so it'd only be fair, everyone would pay that 6%.
That's what I mean.
And we
by
could
county
maybe
rates.
use that 6% to help offset this debt service cost in that area for the first 10 years.
As long as so what you're saying is whenever they pay for water, they're paying the same price, but
same bill.
I don't care how we get there.
They would basically have the same bill because the customers in the unincorporated area pay a 6% franchise. When we took over Sebastian, we had that same 6%. So we're proposing the same thing, so they'd be treated the same as Sebastian.
That's all I'm after. And
okay.
I'm ready for the vote on this and some comments after.
Any other comments?
Yeah,
Okay, we have a
Question.
Yes.
The 6% franchise fee that we charge, does that go in the general fund, or where does that go?
From the unincorporated customers, it goes into our MSTU fund for providing services in the unincorporated area. For Sebastian, it goes into the general fund to provide countywide services that offsets ad valorem taxes. We use that rate to help balance the budget, the general fund and the MSTU fund.
Any other questions, gentlemen?
Just, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be opposed to the motion. I don't have any problem giving them the county rates, but I think it's be more prudent to do it after we know what our exact costs are and our exact revenues. So from a business point of view, I can't support guaranteeing a rate when we don't really know what the true figures are.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
I appreciate the concern, but I think that the benefits outweigh any risks involved in this, and that's why I feel comfortable moving forward with a 0% estimated surcharge.
Ditto. Yeah. And Commissioner Davis, all I can say is if the subaqueous permit is as expensive as the boat ramp permit, these numbers are going to be way off.
Commissioner, I'm very comfortable because we have already put together our habitat conservation plan, therefore it won't be a problem pulling a permit.
Commissioner Wheeler. I feel like, Eric and everybody's done their homework here. We've got full disclosure. And so on faith, I'll support this, that we've got all the information that's necessary.
Yeah. Okay, we've got 2 statements, 2 dittos, and a negative. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion. Passes 4-1. Commissioner O'Brien, dissenting. Commissioner Davis.
Yes, Commissioner, just wanted to, Eric, as you move forward with options 2 and 3, which is kind of actually probably option 3, I guess, there's, in trying to put myself in the shoes of the other municipality, obviously the transition with employees and as far as a merger of a system, I don't know how that would be handled, but I think if there's some kind of education or cognitive thought process behind how we're going to handle that by the 29th. It doesn't have to be etched in stone, but say, we're not out to put this crew on the streets would probably make it go a little more palatable on the 29th.
And let me just say, Eric, thank you very much for your work, and I'd like to thank Mr. Herron, who's in the audience, for his work. They made something which could have been a difficult process go very seamlessly and very well. And so thank you, gentlemen. Look forward to the 28th.
All right.
Dr. Farr.
28th, 29th. 9th.
Well, 28th at the Shores and the 29th with the joint meeting. Well, next up, we have, gentlemen, I'm going to ask. Looks like we don't have too much further to go. Would you like to just go through?
We can crank this out, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Next up is County Attorney's Matters, Vista Golf LLC, a settlement of code enforcement liens. Mr. Plotkwich.
Mr. Chairman, you're all very familiar with this situation. The very thumbnail explanation is Vista Golf LLC owns the golf course properties out at the Vista development. They've had some times between 2009 and the present when they have not taken care of the golf courses. That's resulted in a number of actions by a code enforcement board and by this board. In 2009, the code enforcement board entered a $100 per day violation fine, which ended up becoming a $5,700 lien. Between 2009 and the present, the board has ordered 7 different mowings of the property, which has resulted in total cost of $7,920. And then more recently, on March 28, 2011, the Code Enforcement Board entered another $100 per day repeat violation fine. This board directed me to go ahead and foreclose on the liens that we could. That direction was confirmed by the Code Enforcement Board on March 28. At about that same time, I was contacted by the principal of Vista Golf LLC, who basically wanted to bring this matter to a conclusion and put us on some basis going forward that made sense. So we sat down, County Administrator, myself, County Planning Director Bob Keating, and the County Code Enforcement Officer Roland DeBloy. We sat down with the principal of Vista Golf LLC and we worked out a settlement agreement subject to this board's approval. The agreement is that Vista Golf will pay the $5,700 lien. They will pay 100% of the 11 mowings, that's $7,920. And I would add that that figure includes $250 of administrative costs for each of those mowings. So we've got our costs covered in that as well. Lastly, they would agree to keep the property in compliance in the future. And assuming they do, for a period of at least 9 months, we would at that point release the March 28 repeat violation order. And that order came with a little bit of confusion because the principal maintained that he was unaware of the hearing that day and therefore did not attend and felt like the order had been entered really without his knowledge. And we felt it was probably a good idea to use that order as leverage to make sure that the property gets maintained going forward. So we did a proposed settlement agreement, very brief. It starts on page 97 of the package, and we would suggest that it be approved. We do have the Vista Golf's check for the full amount that they're agreeing to pay under the settlement agreement.
Move approval.
Second. We have a motion from Commissioner Wheeler, a second from Commissioner O'Brien. Any discussion?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Davis.
Mr. Plotkwich, what would happen, and I guess let's suppose they didn't after this, then we would start the process over again, probably a little more accelerated than the last, but what I'm more concerned about than any is the position of our code enforcement lien versus the secured mortgage on the property after we were to release this. That would clearly put us second, in my opinion, and basically we would enjoy the benefit of being foreclosed relatively easy.
Yes, where this places us compared to where we would be without a settlement is if we didn't have a settlement, we're at that point left with our code enforcement remedies alone. By entering into an agreement under which they agree to keep the property in compliance, we now essentially have 2 different paths of remedy, one being code enforcement, the other being enforcement of the contract. You are correct. that going forward, if we have to do code enforcement liens, they will be second to that existing mortgage.
And there's no way of tying this agreement back to those to kind of, I guess, keep us in the driver's seat to a certain extent?
Well, I don't know if there is a way or not. I mean, we could try to do that. The problem that we kind of ran into was, even though all these people are related, the principal of Vista Golf LLC is Chuck. The person holding the mortgage, the persons holding the mortgage are Charlie and Henrietta. So whether they would subordinate, I do not know. But what we did do is we strengthened our ability to seek injunctive relief. Remember, we talked about this back in early April. Could we seek an injunction, a court order requiring them to maintain the property in compliance? We felt that we probably could, but certainly with the contract in existence now, that strengthens that argument. So it gives us a better argument on the injunction side than we currently have.
I'm ready for the question, Mr. Chair.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Alan. Move on to a further settlement offer of a good bond claim for the North Water Treatment Plant. Again, Alan.
We brought this issue to you back on April 5. You recall that we went out to bid on a project in 2009. H&D Construction bid on it in January 2010. Eventually was awarded the contract in March 2010, but then declined to sign the contract because of their financial difficulties and inability to obtain a performance bond in April 2010. We made a claim on the bid bond that H&D had put up, and we've been negotiating with that company back and forth for the past probably 8 months. I brought it to the board back on April 5 when we had an offer of $35,000, and I recommended that the board reject that offer. The truth be known, I wanted the board to reject that offer so I could take that rejection back and try to increase the settlement amount. That process did happen. I was able to get the offer increased to $42,500. For a variety of reasons, I think at this point we have reached the end and the best result of the settlement process. I think it's a decent settlement. It's not tremendous, but it's decent, and keeping in mind the amount of staff time and the expense of litigation, I think at this point it's worth accepting that offer and closing this chapter.
Move approval. We have a motion for Commissioner Fletcher, a second for Commissioner Davis. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Yeah.